My wife and her family treated me like an ATM. One day before Christmas, my wife smirked. My sisters and friends are spending Christmas here. It's only 35 people. She expected me to pay, clean, and bow. I smiled. That night, I flew to Florida for a trip. When they arrived and saw the empty kitchen, her face turned pale, but the real surprise was still to come. Let me tell you something about that moment when you finally see the game for what it really is. My name is Marcus Hale. I'm 34 years old, and for the past 4 years I've been living in what I thought was a marriage, but was actually a very expensive subscription service that I somehow never signed up for. The kind where you pay monthly, get treated like garbage, and somehow they convince you it's a premium experience. Picture this. December 23rd, 2:30 in the afternoon, and I'm standing in my own kitchen. Well, technically our kitchen, but let's be real about who's been footing the mortgage. Watching my wife Bianca lean against the marble island that I paid for, scrolling through her phone with the kind of casual indifference usually reserved for people deciding what to binge watch on Netflix. Except she wasn't picking a show. She was planning my personal hell. Oh, by the way, she says, not even bothering to look up from her group chat with her sisters and friends. My family and the girls are spending Christmas here this year. She pauses, lets that little bomb settle, then delivers the real kicker with this smirk that could have powered half of Connecticut. It's only 35 people. Only 35 people. Let that marinate for a second. She said, only, like she was talking about ordering a few extra pizzas, not orchestrating what was essentially a small wedding reception with 24 hours notice. And when I say my family and the girls, I'm talking about her sisters Harper and Zoe. One who speaks exclusively in exclamation points, and the other who could cut glass with her passive-aggressive comments. Plus her mother Margaret, who has turned giving backhanded compliments into an Olympic sport, and a rotating cast of Bianca's friends who treat my house like their personal 5-star resort. Standing there, listening to her casual announcement of my doom, I did some quick math. 35 people meant 35 mouths to feed with food I'd have to buy, cook, and serve. It meant cleaning a house that would get destroyed in approximately 47 minutes. It meant playing host to people who knew me as Bianca's husband Marcus and nothing else, because in 4 years of marriage, not one of them had ever asked me a single question about myself that wasn't related to where I kept the good wine or whether I could Venmo them for their Uber home. The translation was crystal clear. I would pay for everything, shop for everything, cook everything, clean everything, and then bow gracefully while they told me how I could have done it better. It was like being hired as a personal assistant, caterer, housekeeper, and financial advisor all rolled into one, except instead of getting paid, I got the privilege of being married to the boss. I glanced around the kitchen, the same kitchen where I'd been cooking dinner alone most nights because Bianca was too busy with her latest social media project or her weekly girls' nights that somehow always ended up on my credit card. The pantry was completely empty because, funny story, when you're married to someone who thinks groceries magically appear in the fridge, you tend to run out of food pretty quickly. The bills were stacked on the counter, all addressed to me, all waiting for my signature, all representing a life I was funding but barely living. Earlier that day, I'd approved holiday bonuses for my entire staff. Real bonuses, the kind that actually matter to people who work their asses off all year. I'd been thinking about how good it felt to take care of people who respected what I did, who saw me as more than just a walking wallet with a pulse. And here was my wife, treating me like her personal Black Friday sale, except the discounts never ended and I was the one paying full price. But here's the thing about rock bottom. It gives you a solid foundation to build on. Standing there, watching Bianca plan my destruction with the casual cruelty of someone ordering a latte, something clicked. Not anger, exactly. More like clarity. The kind of clarity you get when you finally admit that the person you've been trying to love doesn't actually see you as a person worth loving. I smiled. Not the fake smile I'd been wearing to family dinners for 4 years, but a real one. The kind of smile you wear when you realize the game is rigged and you're about to flip the board. Sounds great, honey, I said, my voice steady as concrete. I'm sure it'll be wonderful. Then I pulled out my phone and sent a text to my assistant, Tammy Okoye, who's basically the only person in my life who treats me like a human being with actual value. Book the 8:15 p.m. flight to Miami. Ocean View Suite. 3 dots appeared immediately. Tammy doesn't ask questions when I use that tone. She just makes things happen. While Bianca continued her group chat planning session, probably deciding which expensive wine I'd be serving with the 7-course meal I'd apparently be preparing, I walked to my home office and opened the wall safe where I kept my black cards. All of them. The ones that had been funding this 4-year performance art piece called Marriage to Someone Who Thinks Love is a Credit Limit. I placed every single card in the drawer safe, the one with the combination that only I knew. Then I opened my laptop and started canceling things. Every subscription service, every delivery app, every automatic payment that had my name on it and Bianca's spending habits attached to it. Click, click, click. Goodbye to the grocery delivery service, the wine club, the meal kit subscription that she never cooked, the house cleaning service that came twice a week, because God forbid anyone in this house should learn how to operate a vacuum cleaner. The best part? I took one last photo of our kitchen. Spotless, because I cleaned it that morning. Completely unstocked, because Bianca had never learned that food requires actual purchasing and preparation. Beautiful granite countertops and top-of-the-line appliances that were about to host the most epic disaster in Christmas dinner history. If you've ever been loved for your wallet instead of your worth, you know exactly what this feels like. It's the moment when you stop being the supporting character in your own life story. It's the smile you wear when you realize that respect isn't something you can buy, but it's definitely something you can stop paying for. The flight confirmation pinged on my phone just as Bianca looked up from her group chat with that expectant expression she always wore when she was about to delegate my entire existence to me. So you'll handle everything tomorrow, right? I mean, you always do. Always do. Those 2 words carried the weight of 4 years of assumption, for years of being taken for granted, for years of being treated like hired help in my own life. But not anymore. You've got this, I said, grabbing my keys. And for the first time in 4 years, I meant it. She really did have this, all of it. The responsibility, the consequences, the reality check that was about to arrive gift-wrapped in 35 hungry people and 0 preparation. As I headed to the door, I could hear her calling after me, something about picking up wine and making sure the good china was ready. But I was already gone, mentally boarding that 8:15 flight to Miami in a life where my worth wasn't measured in credit card swipes and silent servitude. The game was about to change, and I was about to remember what it felt like to win. Here's the thing nobody tells you about being successful quietly. People will assume you're broke until the moment they need you to pay for something, and then suddenly you're their personal lottery ticket. For 4 years, Bianca and her entire extended circus act had me pegged as Marcus the Reliable, which in their vocabulary translated directly to Marcus the Sucker who pays for everything without complaint. They thought I was some mid-level project manager with stable income. Their words, delivered with the kind of condescending pat on the head you'd give a golden retriever who learned to fetch your slippers. What they didn't know, because they'd never bothered to ask, was that I'm the founder and CEO of North Star Experience Group. We design and deliver high-end corporate retreats and private events for companies that have more money than God and less imagination than a parking meter. I built this empire in complete silence while they were busy spending money they assumed appeared in my bank account through some kind of paycheck magic. The truth is, I started North Star right after my father's auto shop went belly up during the recession. I watched that man work 18-hour days for 30 years, watched him pour his soul into that place, only to lose everything because some hedge fund decided his neighborhood was the perfect spot for a strip mall that sells overpriced smoothies and artisanal dog treats. I made myself a promise standing in that empty shop, surrounded by tools that nobody wanted to buy and memories that nobody wanted to preserve. I would never, ever be at anyone's mercy again. Not financially, not professionally, not personally. I would build something so solid, so valuable, so completely mine that nobody could take it away from me or tell me what it was worth. So while other guys my age were spending their 20s getting wasted and figuring out what they wanted to be when they grew up, I was learning how to turn corporate boredom into unforgettable experiences. I studied hospitality management through online courses, worked catering gigs on weekends, and saved every penny like I was hoarding them for the apocalypse. I learned that rich people will pay stupid money for experiences that make them feel special, and I got really, really good at making people feel special. North Star started in my one-bedroom apartment with a borrowed laptop and a dream of never having to ask anyone for anything ever again. 5 years later, We're running retreats for Fortune 500 companies and locations that most people only see in Instagram posts they can't afford to recreate. We're talking about week-long executive experiences in Napa Valley, team-building adventures in the Colorado Rockies, and corporate celebrations that make wedding receptions look like potluck dinners. My team is the real secret sauce, though. Rafi Qureshi, my CFO, handles our numbers like he's conducting a symphony orchestra. Everything in perfect harmony, every dollar accounted for, every profit margin calculated to the penny. The guy could balance a budget with his eyes closed while solving a Rubik's Cube. When Rafi tells me we can afford something, I don't even question it because he's never, not once, been wrong about money. Then there's Sloan Kim, our head of operations, who could organize the invasion of Normandy with 48 hours notice and still have time to source organic, locally grown flowers for the victory celebration. I've watched this woman move a 200-person corporate gala from San Francisco to Chicago in 2 days because the original venue got hit by a fire inspection that revealed some minor structural issues. By minor, I mean the building was basically held together with prayers and building code violations. Sloan had the entire event relocated, recatered, and redecorated before the client even finished panicking. And Chef Mateo Alvarez. This guy runs our culinary arm like he's conducting the New York Philharmonic. We're talking about someone who can design a menu that accommodates 37 different dietary restrictions while still making food that tastes like it was blessed by the gods themselves. I've seen him create a 5-course meal using only ingredients available within a 50-mile radius of our location because some tech executive decided he wanted authentic local flavor with 6 hours notice. Mateo didn't even blink. He just smiled and started making phone calls to farmers who probably thought they were getting pranked. But here's the kicker. Bianca and her family never asked what I actually did for work. Not once. In 4 years of marriage, not a single person in that house had expressed even the smallest curiosity about how I spent my days or where our money came from. I was just Marcus the Reliable, the guy who showed up with his credit card and his willingness to handle everything they couldn't be bothered with. Need new furniture for the living room? Marcus will take care of it. Want to redo the guest bathroom because Harper complained that the tiles were too beige? Marcus will handle it. Emergency mani-pedi session for 12 people because Zoe was having a crisis about her nail art not matching her outfit for some brunch that probably cost more than most people's car payments? Put it on Marcus's card. At family dinners, I was the guy who paid the check and then disappeared into the kitchen to load the dishwasher while everyone else moved to the living room for the real conversation, the one I apparently wasn't important enough to join. They'd sit around talking about their days, their drama, their dreams, while I scrubbed plates and wondered when exactly I'd become the hired help in my own life. I told myself it was love. I told myself that providing for people was how you showed you cared about them. I told myself that their constant need for my resources was just their way of including me in their lives. But deep down, in the part of my brain that I tried really hard to ignore, I knew the truth. I wasn't their family member, I was their bill. Every month, like clockwork, there would be some new expense that somehow became my responsibility. Weekend house in the Hamptons? Obviously that was on me, because we all use it, and Marcus makes good money. Designer handbags for Bianca's birthday? She deserves nice things, and you know how important fashion is to her. Emergency car repairs for Harper after she rear-ended someone while texting about her latest dating disaster? Family helps family, Marcus. The worst part wasn't the money, though. Money I had. The worst part was the complete and total lack of appreciation, recognition, or basic human respect. I was an ATM that occasionally needed feeding and could be programmed to clean bathrooms and organize social events. I was a resource to be managed, not a person to be loved. But they had no idea what they were really dealing with. While they saw Marcus the Reliable wallet, they were actually living with Marcus the guy who built a multi-million-dollar business from scratch and could disappear tomorrow without breaking a sweat. And tomorrow, they were about to find out the difference. You know that moment in a horror movie when the protagonist realizes they're not watching a thriller, they're actually living in one? That was me at lunch the next day, sitting in what used to be my favorite cafe, watching my mother-in-law Margaret orchestrate my personal nightmare with the efficiency of a military general planning a hostile takeover. Margaret Russo. And yes, she still uses her maiden name because Russo commands respect in this town, had called this little gathering under the guise of planning a lovely family Christmas. But what I was witnessing was less lovely family planning and more, let's see how much we can pile on to Marcus before he finally snaps. She spread her notes across the table like she was presenting a business proposal, which, let's be honest, she basically was. Except in this business, I was both the investor and the unpaid labor force. Now, Marcus, darling, she began, and I already knew I was screwed because Margaret only called me darling when she was about to cost me serious money. 35 guests means we'll need at least 7 main dishes to accommodate everyone's preferences. 7 main dishes for one meal. I sat there calculating the grocery bill in my head while she continued her presentation like she was requesting a light snack instead of what amounted to catering a small wedding reception. And of course, we'll need all the traditional sides: mashed potatoes, green bean casserole, stuffing, cranberry sauce, roasted vegetables, and that divine sweet potato casserole you made last year. She paused to check her notes, because apparently my impending mental breakdown required proper documentation. Oh, and please hire a string quartet. Bianca mentioned she can't be stressed with all the planning, so live music would really set the right atmosphere. A string quartet for Christmas dinner in my living room, because apparently having 35 people invade my home wasn't entertainment enough. We needed professional musicians to soundtrack my descent into madness. Before I could process that particular insanity, Harper jumped in with her trademark enthusiasm that could power a small city. Oh, and Marcus, can you set up one of those hot cocoa bars? You know, with all the fancy toppings and maybe some branded cups with our family name? I saw it on Pinterest, and it would be so Instagram-worthy. Branded cups with our family name for hot cocoa at a Christmas dinner that I was apparently catering, hosting, and now turning into some kind of winter wonderland theme park. Harper was practically bouncing in her seat like a caffeinated golden retriever who'd just discovered tennis balls. But wait, there's more. Because this family operates on the principle that no request is complete until it's been made completely impossible to fulfill. Enter Zoe, the quiet sister with a PhD in making simple things complicated. Actually, Zoe said in that soft voice she uses when she's about to drop a bomb that'll blow up everyone's plans, we should make sure everything is vegan and gluten-free. And definitely no nuts. Alex is bringing his new girlfriend, and she has severe allergies. Oh, and can we make sure the music isn't too loud? Some of us have sensory issues. Vegan, gluten-free, nut-free, 7 main dishes for 35 people, with a string quartet that can't play too loud, and a hot cocoa bar with custom-branded cups, all to be prepared, cooked, and served by yours truly while everyone else, what? Sat around looking pretty and posting Instagram stories about their amazing family Christmas. I watched them plan my labor like I was a catering service they'd hired, except catering services get paid and treated with basic professional respect. These people were treating me like a rented van, useful for hauling their stuff around, but not really worthy of consideration as anything more than a convenient tool. Then Bianca, who had been suspiciously quiet during this whole planning session, slid a piece of paper across the table to me. I looked down and saw what could only be described as an invoice disguised as a helpful list. Every item was numbered, organized by category, with specific brand preferences noted in her careful handwriting. I put together everything we'll need, she said with the kind of smile you see in commercials for products that definitely don't work as advertised. I thought this would make shopping easier for you. Shopping easier for me. Like I was her personal grocery delivery service who happened to also live in her house and share her bed. I scanned the list quickly. Organic this, artisanal that, imported whatever, and specialty ingredients that probably cost more per pound than most people's monthly car payments. But here's where it got really interesting. When I mentioned that I might have a business trip that weekend, you know, the kind of work obligation that actually pays for all this nonsense, Bianca waved it off like I'd suggested canceling Christmas altogether. Just move it, Marcus. Family comes first, right? She said it with this expectant smile, like she was testing me to see if I'd learned my lesson about priorities. Besides, you always figure these things out. Family comes first. Funny how their definition of family seemed to include my money and my time, but never my boundaries, my needs, or my basic human dignity. And you always figure these things out was their polite way of saying, You always do whatever we want without complaining. So why would this time be any different? I sat there looking at these four women who had just spent the last 45 minutes planning every detail of my weekend slavery, and something crystallized in my mind. This wasn't a request. This wasn't even a demand. This was an assumption so deeply embedded in their worldview that they couldn't imagine any other possibility. They genuinely believed that I existed to fund their entertainment and handle their logistics. In their minds, I was Marcus the reliable ATM, programmed to dispense cash and labor on demand, with no thoughts, feelings, or priorities of my own worth considering. That afternoon, my phone rang. Jordan Pike, my attorney and the only person in my life who'd never asked me to pay for his lunch, was calling with an update on something I'd been working on for months. Something these lovely ladies knew absolutely nothing about. "Marcus, I've got all the paperwork ready," Jordan said. "Once we flip these switches, there's no going back. You sure about this?" I looked at the list Bianca had given me, still sitting on the table like a monument to my 4 years of voluntary servitude. 7 main dishes, 35 guests, custom-branded hot cocoa cups, a string quartet for background music, all to be funded, organized, and executed by me while they took credit for hosting a beautiful family Christmas. "Tomorrow," I told Jordan. "Tomorrow what?" "Do it tomorrow." He paused. "You realize what this means?" "Exactly. Because sometimes the best gift you can give yourself is the gift of consequences for other people's choices." And Christmas was about to get very, very interesting. There's something almost poetic about walking out of your own house for the last time as the guy who pays for everything and handles everyone else's problems. It was 6:40 p.m. on Christmas Eve, and I was rolling my carry-on past the Christmas tree that Bianca had bought with my credit card 3 weeks ago, and then promptly forgot existed. The thing was still sitting there like a 7-foot-tall monument to good intentions and zero follow-through. No lights, no ornaments, no star on top. Just a dead pine tree taking up space in what used to be my living room. Kind of fitting, really. The perfect metaphor for our entire marriage. My phone buzzed with a text from Tammy as I loaded my bag into the car. Miami suite confirmed. Meeting with Vivian Cho, CEO of Seabright Resorts. 10 a.m. on the 26th. Pre-dinner with her team tomorrow 7 p.m. Everything's locked and loaded, boss. Tammy Okoye is the kind of assistant who makes miracles look routine. While other people's assistants are busy scheduling coffee meetings and updating calendars, Tammy's out there orchestrating business deals that could change everything. She'd been working on this Seabright opportunity for months, setting up meetings, preparing presentations, and laying the groundwork for what could be the biggest contract in North Star's history. And she'd done it all while I was pretending to be interested in Margaret's opinions about proper napkin folding techniques. As I backed out of the driveway, my phone lit up with notifications from Bianca's group chat. I glanced at the screen long enough to see a photo of some dress she'd found at Nordstrom. Found being their family's code word for purchased with Marcus's money while Marcus wasn't around to object. The caption read something about needing to look perfect for tomorrow's family celebration. Family celebration. Right. The event where I was supposed to play the role of unpaid caterer, decorator, entertainment coordinator, and cleanup crew, while 35 people who barely acknowledged my existence consumed 7 main courses and complained about the background music volume. I pulled into the airport parking garage and sat in my car for a minute, engine off, just listening to the silence. No honey-do lists. No emergency shopping requests. No one asking me to figure out how to accommodate someone's cousin's girlfriend's gluten sensitivity while also making sure the vegan options didn't look too healthy because that might offend the meat eaters. Just silence and choice and the strange, almost forgotten feeling of being in control of my own schedule. Before heading to security, I did one last thing that felt like cutting the final thread holding up a house of cards. I left a single envelope on the entry table inside our front door. 3 emergency caterer hotlines that I'd researched, and 1 plain business card for North Star Experience Group. No name on it, no explanation, just a simple white card with elegant lettering and a phone number. Let them figure it out. Let them call around on Christmas Eve trying to find someone willing to cater a 7-course meal for 35 people with 6 hours notice. Let them discover what the rest of the world already knows. That good service costs money, that last-minute requests cost extra money, and that treating service providers like garbage costs you everything. At the airport, I called Dr. Armand Leclerc, my therapist, and the only person who'd been consistently telling me the truth about my situation for the past 6 months. I'd started seeing Armand after a particularly brutal family dinner where Margaret had spent 45 minutes explaining everything I'd done wrong with the appetizer course, while Harper live tweeted the experience and Zoe took notes on her phone for next time. Marcus, Armand answered on the second ring, his French accent making even crisis interventions sound sophisticated. How are you feeling about tonight? Like I'm about to find out what it's like to breathe underwater, I said, settling into my seat at the gate. Around me, other travelers were rushing to catch flights home for Christmas, dragging overstuffed suitcases and screaming children in the general chaos of holiday travel. But I felt calm, eerily, suspiciously calm. That is good, Armand said. You know what you need to remember? Boundaries are not cruelty. Boundaries are love for yourself. When you stop enabling other people's dysfunction, you give them the opportunity to grow, or to show you who they really are. And if they show me they're exactly who I think they are, then you will have your answer, and you can stop wondering if you are making the right choice. The plane lifted off through thick December clouds that hung over Connecticut like a gray blanket, and I watched the lights of my old life disappear below. No guilt, no second thoughts, no dramatic internal monologue about what I might be losing. Just relief. Pure, clean relief that felt like oxygen after years of holding my breath. I ordered a bourbon, the good stuff, the kind that costs what most people spend on groceries, and pulled out my laptop. The Seabright proposal was already loaded, every slide perfect, every number verified by Rafi, every logistical detail confirmed by Sloan. This was what I did. This was who I was when I wasn't playing the role of Marcus, the reliable cash dispenser. Halfway through the flight, I made the mistake of checking my phone. The group chat was exploding. Screenshot after screenshot of text messages between family members, each one more frantic than the last. 6:10 p.m. from Bianca. Where are you? Guests start arriving at 7. 6:22 p.m. Tell me you're joking right now. 6:40 p.m. Guests are arriving and there's no food. I sent exactly one reply. You've got this. Then I turned my phone to airplane mode and opened my laptop to review tomorrow's presentation. Because while they were discovering what happens when the ATM stops dispensing cash, I was about to close the biggest deal of my career with people who actually respected what I did for a living. 30,000 feet above my problems, sipping bourbon that tasted like freedom, I finally understood what Dr. Leclerc had been trying to tell me. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is let people experience the consequences of their choices. And sometimes the most loving thing you can do for yourself is get on a plane. Picture this, Christmas Eve, 5:30 p.m. And I'm sitting on a balcony overlooking Biscayne Bay, watching the Miami skyline light up like a Christmas tree that someone actually bothered to decorate. The ocean breeze is carrying the scent of salt and possibility, and my phone is buzzing like an angry wasp trapped in a mason jar. But I'm not reaching for it. Not yet. In their heads, I was probably racing through some grocery store right now, frantically grabbing ingredients for 7 main courses while muttering apologies to cashiers about the last-minute holiday rush. They probably pictured me loading up my SUV with enough food to feed a small army, then speeding home to transform our kitchen into some kind of culinary miracle factory. Reality check. I was sipping a perfectly mixed old-fashioned and watching pelicans dive for fish while the sun painted the sky in shades of orange and pink that no Instagram filter could improve. The closest I'd come to grocery shopping was admiring the fruit bowl in my suite, which someone else had thoughtfully arranged and someone else would thoughtfully replace tomorrow. At exactly 6:10 p.m., my phone lit up with Bianca's first text. Where are you? 3 words. No context, no please, no recognition that maybe, just maybe, her husband might have his own life and schedule to consider. Just a demand disguised as a question, typed with the confidence of someone who'd never once had to wonder where her next meal was coming from or who was going to pay for it. I watched the text sit there on my screen like a small, needy creature begging for attention. Then I took another sip of my drink and opened the Seabright Resorts presentation on my laptop instead. This was what real work looked like. Detailed proposals, profit projections, and partnership opportunities with people who treated business relationships like actual relationships instead of legalized robbery. 6:22 p.m. Tell me you're joking. Now we were getting somewhere. The panic was starting to set in. I could practically hear her voice through the text, that particular tone she used when reality wasn't conforming to her expectations and she needed someone to blame for it. Usually, that someone was me, and usually, I'd already be halfway home with a trunk full of groceries and a head full of apologies for not being psychic enough to anticipate her needs. But I wasn't halfway home. I was 1,000 miles away, reviewing catering proposals for a legitimate business meeting with people who understood that good service requires advanced planning, clear communication, and mutual respect. 6:40 p.m., guests are arriving. All caps. The international text message symbol for my poor planning has become your emergency. I could picture the scene. Cars pulling up to our house, people carrying bottles of wine they expected me to serve, everyone dressed up for a Christmas dinner that existed only in Bianca's group chat fantasies. By now, someone had probably volunteered to check the kitchen, expecting to find me elbow deep in holiday preparations. Instead, they would have discovered what I'd left behind: empty counters, an unstocked pantry, and the kind of silence that screams louder than any argument ever could. I finally decided to respond, typing out exactly 4 words that contained more truth than 4 years of marriage counseling. "You've got this." Then I silenced my phone and walked to dinner. The Seabright team dinner was everything my home life wasn't: professional, respectful, and focused on actual collaboration instead of exploitation. We sat at a table overlooking the water, discussing event logistics with people who understood that good outcomes require good planning. No one expected me to read their minds. No one assumed I'd handle everything myself, and when the check came, we split it like civilized human beings who respected each other's time and contributions. Later, back in my suite, I made the mistake of unsilencing my phone to check the time. What I found was a masterclass in chaos management, documented in real time through a stream of panicked text messages, frantic phone calls, and social media posts that told the story of Christmas dinner's complete and total collapse. The blow-by-blow was almost artistic in its progression from confident expectation to dawning horror to full-scale meltdown. Cards declined. That was the first domino to fall. Bianca had tried to order emergency catering with our joint credit card, the one I'd quietly frozen that afternoon. Then she'd tried the grocery delivery app, which required my account login. Then the wine delivery service, which was linked to my membership. Every digital convenience they'd taken for granted was suddenly unavailable, like trying to use a remote control with dead batteries. Click, click, click. Nothing happening. No response. Just the slow realization that the magic money machine had finally broken down. The delivery apps were the next disaster. Bianca had apparently spent an hour trying to order groceries from 3 different services, only to discover that they were all set up under my accounts, with my payment methods linked to my phone number. Without access to those accounts, she might as well have been trying to order food by sending smoke signals. Then came the restaurant calls. Christmas Eve, 7:30 p.m., and they were trying to find someone, anyone, willing to deliver enough food for 35 people. I could imagine those conversations. "Hi, we need 7 main courses, all with different dietary restrictions, delivered in the next hour. What do you mean you're fully booked? What do you mean you need 3 days' notice for orders this size? What do you mean you're closed?" The photos that started appearing in the group chat were the real masterpiece, though. Someone, probably Harper, who documented everything for social media, had started taking pictures of the evening's creative solutions. Pizza boxes on our good china. Paper towels being used as napkins because apparently no one in that house knew where I kept the actual napkins. Margaret standing in our kitchen, still dressed in her Christmas finery, looking like she'd been asked to perform surgery with a butter knife. Bianca pale as winter, sitting at our dining room table surrounded by 35 hungry people and absolutely nothing that resembled the elaborate feast she'd promised them. Harper in the background, frantically whisper-shouting into her phone, probably trying to find an open McDonald's. Zoe crying over store-bought cookies that someone had brought as a backup, because apparently they contained nuts and half the guests couldn't eat them. 35 people, 7 promised main courses, 0 actual food preparation, and not a single person in that house who knew how to turn raw ingredients into a meal. It was beautiful, in the way that natural disasters are beautiful, terrible and devastating, and completely unstoppable once they get started. For years of taking me for granted. For years of assuming I'd always be there to fix their problems and fund their fantasies. All coming crashing down in one perfectly orchestrated evening of consequences. And the best part? I was 1,000 miles away, getting ready for the biggest business opportunity of my career, finally remembering what it felt like to be respected for what I brought to the table instead of just expected to set the table for everyone else. You know that feeling when the universe decides to hand you a Christmas present so perfectly wrapped that you almost don't want to open it because the anticipation is too delicious? That was me at 9:45 a.m. on December 26th, sitting in the pristine lobby of Seabright Resorts Miami headquarters, watching Vivian Cho stride through the glass doors looking like she'd just survived a natural disaster and found it hilarious. Vivian Cho is the kind of CEO who makes other executives nervous just by existing. She built Seabright from a single boutique hotel in Key West into a luxury resort empire that spans 3 continents. And she did it by having zero tolerance for bullshit and an almost supernatural ability to spot quality from a mile away. When Vivian calls a meeting, Fortune 500 companies rearrange their calendars. When she considers a partnership, grown men in Armani suits start sweating through their deodorant. So when she walked into our meeting 15 minutes late, slightly windblown, and wearing the kind of expression that suggested she'd just witnessed something both tragic and deeply amusing, I knew something interesting had happened. "Marcus," she said, settling into the chair across from me with the grace of someone who's used to commanding rooms full of people who make more money than small countries. "I am so sorry I'm late. I just flew in from the strangest VIP party in your neck of the woods." My coffee cup paused halfway to my lips. "Connecticut? Fairfield County," she nodded, and I felt the universe shift slightly on its axis. A friend of mine dragged me to what was supposed to be an exclusive Christmas celebration. The host spent 20 minutes bragging about how her husband would take care of everything. The food, the service, the whole production. Very confident, very specific promises about this elaborate feast he was preparing. I kept my face perfectly neutral, which is a skill you develop when you've spent 4 years listening to people talk about your life like you're not in the room. How did that work out? Vivian's laugh was like champagne bubbles, light, effervescent, and slightly dangerous. We ate cold pizza off Waterford crystal plates while the host had what I can only describe as a very public nervous breakdown. Her mother-in-law was in the kitchen trying to figure out how to work a microwave, and I'm pretty sure someone was crying in the bathroom about gluten contamination. The universe, apparently, has a sense of humor darker than my morning coffee. The best part, Vivian continued, pulling out her phone, was watching 35 people who had clearly never prepared a meal in their lives trying to figure out how to turn frozen appetizers into a 7-course dinner. I took notes. It was like watching a master class in what happens when entitlement meets reality. I took a sip of my coffee and made what I hoped was an appropriately sympathetic noise. "Sounds like poor planning." "Poor planning doesn't begin to cover it," she said, scrolling through what looked like photos on her phone. This was a complete failure to understand that other people aren't magical service providers who exist solely to fulfill your expectations. The host kept saying things like he always handles this and he never lets us down, like she was talking about a vending machine instead of a human being. We sat down in the conference room, and I walked her through North Star's model with the kind of focused energy that comes from finally being in a room where your expertise is valued instead of taken for granted. I explained our approach to event management, transparent budgeting from day one, crisis contingency plans for every possible disaster, partnerships with local vendors in 6 major cities, and a team that treats every client like they're our only client. "We don't just plan events," I told her, clicking through slides that Sloan had prepared with her usual meticulous attention to detail. "We create experiences that work because we plan for the things that could go wrong instead of just hoping they won't." Vivian's eyes lit up with the kind of professional interest that makes deals happen. "You built this quietly?" "I prefer to let the work speak for itself," I said. "We outwork the companies that spend more on advertising than they do on actual service delivery." "You'd be shocked," she said, leaning back in her chair, "how many people in this industry prefer the photo opportunity to the actual planning. They want the credit for hosting an amazing event, but they don't want to do the work that makes events actually amazing." I wasn't shocked at all. I'd been living with those people for 4 years. I showed her our warehouse system, climate-controlled storage facilities where we keep everything from backup generators to emergency linens, ready to deploy within hours. I walked through our vendor network, relationships we'd built with everyone from florists to security companies, people who trusted us because we'd never left them holding the bag when clients changed their minds at the last minute. Most event companies treat vendors like disposable resources, I explained. We treat them like the professionals they are. When you respect the people who make your events possible, they'll move mountains for you when emergencies happen. Vivian nodded slowly. And when you don't respect them, then you end up serving pizza on crystal plates while your guests tweet about the disaster in real time. She laughed again, but this time it was the laugh of someone who'd found exactly what they were looking for. Tell me about crisis management. I pulled up Sloan's contingency protocols, detailed flowcharts that covered everything from weather disasters to vendor no-shows to clients who decided to double their guest count with 6 hours' notice. We plan for failure at every step. Backup catering, backup venues, backup transportation. We assume something will go wrong, so when it does, we're ready. Because hoping for the best isn't a business strategy, hope is great for personal relationships, I said. But for events, you need systems. Vivian was quiet for a moment, studying the presentation slides with the intensity of someone who'd built an empire by recognizing quality when she saw it. Then she looked up at me with the kind of smile that changes everything. Marcus, I have to ask, do you live in Fairfield County? The question hung in the air like a perfectly pitched curveball. I could lie, deflect, or give some vague non-answer. Instead, I decided to go with the truth. I do. And do you happen to be married to someone who thinks hosting means delegating everything to other people? The silence stretched between us like a bridge I could either cross or burn. I thought about 4 years of being treated like hired help in my own home. I thought about Bianca's group chat planning my servitude. I thought about Margaret's helpful suggestions and Harper's Pinterest dreams and Zoe's dietary restrictions that somehow always became my problem to solve. Then I thought about pizza boxes on Waterford Crystal and 35 hungry people discovering that entitlement isn't edible. Not anymore, I said. December 26th, 9 a.m. sharp, and I'm sitting in Seabright's executive boardroom watching my team do what they do best, make million-dollar deals look like casual conversation over coffee. The room overlooks downtown Miami, all glass and steel, and the kind of view that reminds you why people fight wars over waterfront real estate. But I'm not looking at the view. I'm watching Vivian Cho's executive team realize that they're about to partner with people who actually know what the hell they're doing. Rafi opened with our financial projections, and I swear the man could make a grocery list sound like a symphony. He laid out our profit margins, our growth trajectory, and our reinvestment strategy with the kind of precision that makes CFOs weep tears of joy. When he explained how we'd scaled from a one-man operation to a multi-million-dollar company without taking on debt, Vivian's VP of Finance actually leaned forward and asked if we were hiring. Our model is simple, Rafi said, clicking through slides that showed 5 years of steady growth without a single quarter in the red. We charge what we're worth. We deliver what we promise, and we save money by not fixing disasters that never should have happened in the first place. Sloan followed with logistics. Because when you want to impress people who run a hospitality empire, you show them how you move mountains without breaking a sweat. She pulled up our vendor network map. A web of relationships spanning 6 major cities, partnerships with everyone from linen suppliers to emergency backup generators. Last month, Sloan said, we had a client decide to move their 400-person corporate retreat from Denver to Seattle with 72 hours notice because the CEO's daughter wanted to get married at the original venue. Different city, different climate, different vendor relationships. We executed the switch without missing a single detail. Vivian's operations director raised an eyebrow. Same menu. Better menu. Sloan smiled. Turns out our Seattle partners had access to fresh Pacific Northwest seafood that wasn't available in Denver. The client called it the best event they'd ever attended. But the real showstopper was Mateo's presentation. He'd prepared a tasting menu portfolio. Not just photos of pretty food, but detailed notes on dietary accommodations, cost breakdowns, and preparation timelines that could handle everything from kosher requirements to molecular gastronomy requests. Food is storytelling, Mateo said, laying out photos of events we'd catered, from intimate dinners for 12 to festivals for thousands. But the best story in the world doesn't matter if you can't execute it. We don't just plan menus, we plan for reality. He showed them his contingency systems, backup suppliers for every ingredient, alternative preparation methods for different kitchen setups, and a network of partner chefs who could step in if someone got sick or equipment failed. The kind of planning that turns potential disasters into minor inconveniences. Vivian's team was asking the right questions, not just about costs and timelines, but about philosophy and approach. They wanted to understand how we thought about problems, how we handled pressure, how we maintained quality when everything was going wrong. That's when things got interesting. Right in the middle of our Q&A session, Vivian's chief of staff slid an iPad across the table. On the screen was a LinkedIn thread that was spreading through professional networks like wildfire. A series of posts about a Christmas dinner disaster that had already become a cautionary tale about event planning gone wrong. The original post was from someone named at Event Planner Life. PSA, to anyone who thinks hosting just means telling other people what to do. Just witnessed a 35-person Christmas dinner collapse in real time because the host never learned that delegating is not equal to planning. Pizza boxes on crystal stemware, people. Pizza boxes on Waterford crystal. The comments were brutal and hilarious in equal measure. Event planners sharing their own horror stories about clients who expected miracles with zero preparation. Caterers posting about last-minute calls from people who clearly had no idea what they were asking for. Even some food bloggers had chimed in with photos that were apparently making the rounds on social media. And there, in the comments section, was a photo that made my coffee taste like victory. It showed our dining room, my dining room, with Bianca and Margaret standing in the background looking like they'd just survived a natural disaster. The table was set with our good china, but instead of the 7-course feast they'd promised their guests, there were Domino's boxes and what looked like a grocery store cheese tray that someone had desperately arranged to look fancy. Vivian looked from the iPad to me, then back to the screen. "This is in Connecticut?" I nodded. "And your family expected you to fund and staff a 35-person Christmas dinner with 24 hours notice." "That's correct." The room went quiet for a moment. Not the uncomfortable quiet you get when someone says something awkward, but the thoughtful quiet you get when professionals recognize a teachable moment. "You know," said Vivian's VP of Operations, "we see this all the time in hospitality. People who think hosting means having other people handle everything while they take credit for the outcome. It's the difference between being a host and being a client," Vivian said. "A host takes responsibility for their guest's experience. A client pays someone else to take that responsibility." "The problem," I said, "is when people want to be clients but only pay host prices. They want professional results with amateur preparation and zero accountability." We didn't laugh. It wasn't funny exactly. It was just a simple equation that anyone in the service industry recognizes. Entitlement minus respect equals disaster. And when disaster strikes, the people who created it are never the ones who clean it up. Vivian closed the iPad and looked around the table at her team, then back at me. "Marcus, I've seen enough. Let's sign this deal." Just like that. No more questions, no requests for additional references, no demands for revised proposals. She'd seen our work. She'd seen our approach to crisis management. And she'd seen what happens when people try to fake the kind of expertise we'd spent years building. But the real kicker came when her marketing director asked if we'd be interested in a photo op for the signing. Standard corporate partnership announcement. She explained, executives shaking hands, official documents, maybe a quote about shared values and future collaboration. I thought about 4 years of being invisible in photos at family events, for years of being the guy who paid for everything and then disappeared into the kitchen while everyone else posed for pictures they'd post on social media. "I'd love that," I said, "because sometimes the best revenge isn't getting mad. Sometimes it's getting successful enough that your old problems look exactly as small as they always were. And sometimes, if you're really lucky, the universe arranges for your biggest professional victory to happen on the same day your biggest personal mistake realizes what they've lost." Vivian smiled and reached for her phone. "Let's make this official." There's a particular kind of satisfaction that comes from watching your professional success go viral at the exact moment your personal life's dysfunction becomes a LinkedIn cautionary tale. It's like watching karma get a Twitter account and decide to start dropping receipts. Vivian posted the signing photo at exactly 2:47 p.m. while I was still in the Seabright boardroom, riding the high of closing a $2.5 million deal with people who actually understood the value of what I do. The photo was classic corporate partnership material. Two CEOs shaking hands in front of floor-to-ceiling windows, with the Miami skyline sparkling in the background, the kind of image that says, serious business between serious people. But the caption was what made it special. Thrilled to partner with North Star Experience Group and founder Marcus Hale. Quiet excellence, flawless execution, and the kind of crisis management that turns potential disasters into seamless experiences. Looking forward to creating unforgettable moments together. She tagged both Seabright and North Star, along with a handful of industry hashtags that would make sure the post reached every hospitality executive and event planner on the East Coast. Within minutes, the likes and comments started rolling in from people I'd never met, but who recognized quality when they saw it. Then Tammy, bless her social media savvy heart, hit publish on something we'd been preparing for weeks, a scheduled feature in Business Weekly that she'd been coordinating with their small business spotlight team. The article was titled The Invisible Host: How Marcus Hale Built North Star Experience Group Without Family Money or Industry Connections. The timing was absolutely perfect. While everyone was reading about my professional success, the Christmas dinner disaster was still trending in event planning circles as a masterclass in how not to handle hospitality. The universe had arranged a split-screen comparison between competence and chaos, and I was starring in both storylines simultaneously. My phone started vibrating so aggressively I thought it might achieve flight. Notifications were coming in faster than I could process them. LinkedIn connection requests, Business Weekly sharing the article, industry contacts I hadn't heard from in years suddenly remembering my existence, and through it all, a steady stream of increasingly frantic calls and texts from Connecticut. The first call was from Margaret, which I let go to voicemail because I've learned that nothing good ever comes from answering Margaret's calls when she's in crisis mode. Her voicemail was a masterclass in passive-aggressive confusion. Marcus, darling, I'm seeing some very confusing things on the internet about your business activities. Perhaps we could chat when you have a moment. Business activities. Like I'd been running some kind of underground operation instead of building a legitimate company that she'd never bothered to ask about in 4 years of family dinners. But the text from Bianca was what really made my day. Is this some kind of prank? You're some event guy? Event guy? For years of marriage. And that's how she processed the revelation that her husband was the CEO of a multi-million-dollar company. Not, why didn't you tell me? Or, I'm proud of what you've built. Just confusion that I might be something more than the reliable wallet she'd married. I replied with exactly the truth. I'm the guy who asked for respect for years and finally stopped waiting for it. Meanwhile, the internet was having a field day with the convergence of these two stories. Gloria Finch, who runs the most read society blog in Fairfield County, had reshared Vivian's post with a caption that made me want to frame her words. So that's what Bianca Hale's husband does for work. Turns out Marcus the Reliable is actually Marcus the CEO. Who knew that treating your spouse like hired help might backfire? The comments on Gloria's post were brutal and beautiful. People who'd been at Christmas parties where I'd quietly handled everything while Bianca took credit were suddenly connecting the dots. Event planners who'd heard about the Christmas disaster were now seeing the other side of the story. The narrative was writing itself, and for once, I wasn't the villain or the victim. I was just the guy who'd finally stopped playing a game where he couldn't win. But the real power move happened when Jordan Pike, my attorney and the architect of my exit strategy, filed 2 documents that I'd signed before my wheels up moment in Miami. I'd been planning this for months, waiting for the right moment to cut the financial umbilical cord that had been strangling me for 4 years. Document number 1 was a formal separation notice with complete financial disclosures. Everything clean, everything transparent, everything documented by someone who bills $500 an hour to make sure rich people don't get screwed in divorces. Jordan had been preparing this paperwork for months, waiting for me to give him the green light to pull the trigger. Document number 2 was the real masterpiece. Notice of revocation for every temporary credit line, emergency card, and financial access I'd ever given to Bianca's family for their various events and emergencies. No more surprise charges for Harper's impulse shopping. No more just this once requests from Zoe for whatever crisis she'd invented that week. No more Margaret deciding that my money was family money and spending it accordingly. The beauty of Jordan's work was in the details. Every transaction for the past year, categorized and documented. Every emergency that had somehow become my financial responsibility, itemized with dates and amounts. For years of being treated like a family ATM, all laid out in legal language that made it clear exactly how much my generosity had been costing me. We're talking about $127,000 in unauthorized charges over the past year alone. Everything from Margaret's kitchen renovation that I'd somehow agreed to fund, to Harper's investment in her friend's boutique that went belly up in 3 months, to a dozen smaller expenses that added up to the cost of a luxury car. But my favorite detail was the automatic cancellation of every subscription service, delivery app, and membership that I'd been paying for while they enjoyed the benefits. No more premium grocery delivery. No more wine club memberships. No more house cleaning service, lawn care, or any of the other invisible infrastructure that had made their lives comfortable while they treated me like furniture. The notifications were immediate. Every canceled service sent confirmation emails. Every revoked card triggered automatic decline messages. Every system that had been running on my money and my authorization suddenly went dark. It was like watching someone flip a switch and turn off the life support system for an existence built entirely on other people's labor and resources. Except in this case, the patient wasn't dying. They were just discovering what it felt like to be responsible for their own survival. My phone buzzed with another text from Bianca. The grocery delivery isn't working. I didn't reply, because some lessons are best learned through experience, and some conversations are best had through lawyers who bill by the hour to translate reality into language that entitled people can finally understand. 3 days after Christmas, I found myself sitting in a quiet cafe in downtown Fairfield, the kind of place that serves $12 lattes and pretends the Wi-Fi problems are intentional to encourage mindful conversation. I'd chosen this spot specifically because it was neutral territory. Somewhere public enough that nobody could stage a dramatic scene, but private enough that we could have the kind of conversation that changes everything. I arrived 15 minutes early and claimed a corner table where I could see the door, because 4 years of marriage had taught me that Bianca's family operates like a small military unit when they want something from you. Sure enough, they didn't disappoint. At exactly 2 p.m., all 4 of them walked through the door together: Bianca, Margaret, Harper, and Zoe, dressed like they were attending a funeral for someone they'd never actually liked. No entourage this time. No friends tagging along to provide moral support or social media documentation. No carefully planned performance designed to make me feel guilty for having boundaries. Just the 4 women who'd spent years treating me like their personal ATM and were now discovering what it felt like when the machine stopped dispensing cash. I didn't stand up to greet them. I didn't smile or make small talk or pretend this was a friendly family meeting. I just waited while they settled into their chairs with the careful movements of people who suddenly weren't sure what the rules were anymore. Before anyone could launch into whatever speech they'd rehearsed in the car, I placed a single sheet of paper in the center of the table. No dramatic flourish, no lengthy explanation, just the facts laid out in language simple enough for anyone to understand. Moving forward, non-negotiable terms ***. 1. Equal respect or no contact. I will no longer accept being treated as hired help in my own relationships. 2. No more unpaid labor. My time, skills, and resources are not family assets to be distributed without my consent. 3. Separate finances. All shared accounts, credit lines, and financial responsibilities end immediately. 4. Apology in plain language. Not explanations, not justifications, not blame shifting. Just acknowledgement of how I've been treated. 5. Therapy for all of us if we're rebuilding. Professional help to establish healthy patterns instead of repeating toxic ones. The silence that followed was the kind you hear in libraries and morgues. Heavy, complete, and slightly uncomfortable for everyone involved. I watched them read through the list, their faces going through the same progression of emotions I'd seen countless times before: confusion, indignation, and finally that particular brand of panic that kicks in when people realize their usual manipulation tactics aren't going to work. Margaret was the first to speak. because Margaret has never encountered a silence she couldn't fill with her own voice. She tried what I call this soft cry approach, the delicate dabbing at her eyes with a tissue she'd apparently brought specifically for this moment. "Marcus, sweetheart," she began, her voice trembling with just the right amount of maternal disappointment. "I think there's been some terrible misunderstanding. We've always considered you part of the family. Maybe we didn't express our appreciation as clearly as we should have, but surely you know how much we care about you." Translation: "We're sorry you're upset about being treated like garbage, but let's not get crazy and actually change anything." Harper jumped in with her trademark strategy of reframing problems as communication issues. "I think what Mom's trying to say is that maybe we all could have been clearer about expectations and boundaries. You know how families can take each other for granted sometimes. It's not personal, it's just family dynamics, right?" Translation: "This is a normal family problem that you're making weird by having feelings about it." But Zoe went straight for the nuclear option, the medical emergency excuse that she'd been deploying whenever personal responsibility came knocking. "Marcus, I need you to understand that I have a panic disorder, and sudden changes like this are really triggering for me. I depend on stability, and that stability needs to be, funded. It's not about the money, it's about feeling secure." Translation: "My mental health is your financial responsibility, and questioning that makes you basically a monster." I listened to all of this with the kind of detached interest you'd have watching a nature documentary about predators who'd forgotten how to hunt. These were the same manipulation tactics they'd been using for years, except now they felt desperate instead of automatic. Finally, I looked at Bianca, who'd been staring at the paper like it was written in a foreign language she'd never learned to read. "You left me," she said quietly, and for the first time in this conversation, someone had said something true. "Yes, I did," I replied. "You left me for a business deal." "No," I said. "I left to stop being your butler." The words hung in the air like a bell that couldn't be unrung. For years of resentment, for years of being taken for granted, for years of having my worth measured in credit card swipes and silent service. All of it distilled into one simple sentence that nobody could misunderstand or reframe or explain away. Bianca's eyes filled with tears, but not the performative kind her mother had been attempting. These looked real, which was somehow more devastating than any of the theatrical manipulation I'd been expecting. "Do you still love me?" she asked. It was the question I'd been dreading and preparing for since I'd bought that plane ticket to Miami. The question that got to the heart of why this conversation was happening in a public cafe instead of a lawyer's office. "I love the person I thought you were," I said. "I don't love the version of us that was built on me paying rent to live in my own life." She stared at me for a long moment, processing words that probably sounded like a foreign language to someone who'd never had to question whether her value to other people was conditional on her usefulness. "What was Christmas supposed to prove?" she asked. "That I'm done being treated like a service provider instead of a human being," I said. "That I'm worth more than what I can do for other people. That respect isn't something you get to withhold until it's convenient." The cafe around us continued its normal rhythm. Coffee orders, laptop typing, the kind of ordinary Tuesday afternoon that most people take for granted. But at our table, we were sitting in the wreckage of 4 years of assumptions that had finally collapsed under their own weight. I looked around the table at these 4 women who'd shaped my life for so long, who'd made me feel simultaneously essential and invisible, needed and unappreciated. "Here's what happens next," I said. "If you want me in your lives, you meet me on equal ground. You treat me like someone whose time and resources have value. You acknowledge how this has worked and commit to changing it." I stood up, leaving the paper on the table between us. "If not, I'll be okay. I already am." 2 weeks later, I was living in a completely different world, and I mean that literally. I'd moved into a smaller, brighter place near the Housatonic River. One of those converted warehouse lofts with exposed brick walls and windows that actually let in sunlight instead of just showing you how much yard work you need to catch up on. The rent was half what I'd been paying for the mortgage on our family drama palace, and for the first time in years, I was sleeping like a kid who'd just discovered that monsters aren't actually real. The Seabright contract had officially kicked off, and it was like watching a machine that had been designed by people who actually knew what they were doing. Vivian's team wasn't just professional. They were excited to be working with people who delivered what they promised instead of making excuses for what they couldn't handle. Every phone call was productive, every meeting moved us forward, and nobody expected me to read their minds or fund their personal emergencies. But the real surprise, the one I'd been planning for months while everyone thought I was just Marcus the Reliable, started rolling out exactly 2 weeks after the Christmas disaster. Chef Mateo called me at 6:30 on a Thursday morning, which usually means either incredible news or complete catastrophe. This time, it was incredible news delivered with the kind of excitement that made me glad I'd invested in noise-canceling headphones for my neighbors. "Boss," he said, and I could hear the grin in his voice, "you need to check your bank account. Like, right now." I pulled up the North Star business account on my phone and nearly dropped my coffee. The revenue share pool, the surprise I'd been building for 6 months, had just distributed our first quarterly profit share to every hourly employee who'd ever covered someone else's shift, stayed late to fix a client's last-minute crisis, or gone above and beyond to make sure our event succeeded. We're talking about real money, not gift cards or pizza parties, or the kind of patronizing appreciation that most companies use to avoid actually paying their people what they're worth. The line cooks who'd worked through food poisoning to cover a weekend retreat got four-figure bonuses. The servers who'd handled impossible clients with grace and professionalism got checks that could cover their kids' school clothes for the year. The setup crews who'd worked 18-hour days to make sure everything was perfect got paid like the professionals they were. Sloan had opened our Miami staging hub the week before, and she'd hired 5 new coordinators who actually understood that event planning is a skill that deserves professional compensation. Rafi had restructured our entire payroll system to include profit sharing as a standard benefit, not some generous gift that we might give out if we felt like it. I recorded a video for the team that afternoon, sitting in my new living room with actual natural light streaming through windows that I didn't have to clean myself. The message was simple. We don't serve people who treat us like servants. We serve partners who respect what we bring to the table. The responses were immediate and overwhelming. Photos of checks being deposited, videos of people calling their families with good news, thank you messages from employees who'd never worked for a company that treated them like human beings instead of replaceable resources. This was what success actually looked like. Not just making money, but making sure the people who helped you make that money got their fair share of the rewards. Meanwhile, the business kept growing. The Seabright deal had attracted attention from other luxury hospitality companies who'd been watching Vivian's partnerships for years. 2 more major contracts came in off the back of her LinkedIn post, both from executives who'd heard about our crisis management approach and wanted to work with people who planned for reality instead of hoping for perfection. The best part was watching my team step into their power. Mateo hired 5 new line cooks and started developing a culinary training program that would turn good cooks into great ones. Sloan was fielding calls from event planners in other cities who wanted to learn her logistics systems. Rafi had started giving talks at business schools about sustainable growth and profit sharing as competitive advantages. 3 weeks into my new life, my phone buzzed with a text from Bianca. "We're in family therapy. Margaret wants to apologize." I stared at the message for a long time, sitting on my balcony overlooking the river, watching people walk their dogs and live their normal Tuesday evening lives. Part of me wanted to feel vindicated. They were finally doing the work I'd been asking them to do for years. But mostly, I just felt tired. Tired of being the one who had to demand basic respect. Tired of being the villain for having boundaries. Tired of hoping that people would change instead of accepting who they'd already shown me they were. I texted back, "I'm open to hearing it." Once, and with Jordan present. Because here's what 4 years of being treated like hired help had taught me. Words are cheap, but accountability costs extra. If Margaret wanted to apologize, she could do it in front of someone who bills $500 an hour to make sure the conversation stays honest. If they wanted to rebuild our relationship, they could start by respecting the fact that I wasn't a door they could slam and then expect me to hold the hinges. A month later, Vivian sent me a photo from a rooftop event that North Star had produced for one of her Miami properties. The setup was clean and elegant. The guests were genuinely enjoying themselves, and the kitchen was running like music. Everything in harmony, everyone knowing their role, no drama or chaos or last-minute panic, because someone had forgotten that good outcomes require good planning. I raised a glass of sparkling water to the team that had made it happen, to the quiet version of me that had endured too long, and to the louder version that had finally learned to speak up for himself. The Miami skyline glittered like scattered diamonds, and for the first time in years, my future felt as bright as the view. I wasn't their ATM anymore. I wasn't the reliable guy who fixed everyone else's problems while ignoring his own needs. I wasn't the supporting character in someone else's story, funding their dreams while forgetting I had dreams of my own. I was Marcus Hale, CEO of North Star Experience Group, architect of my own life, and the guy who'd finally stopped paying rent to live in his own existence. I'd learned that respect isn't something you can buy, but it's definitely something you can stop funding. I discovered that boundaries aren't walls. They're bridges that only people who respect you get to cross. And best of all, I'd figured out that the opposite of being taken for granted isn't being appreciated. It's being independent enough that other people's opinions of your worth become interesting information instead of devastating verdicts. The game had changed, and I'd finally remembered how to win. During our divorce hearing, my wife laughed. "I'm taking half your millions, including your grandmother's estate." The courtroom erupted until I stood, handed the judge my envelope, and said, "Check again." Judge simply looked at my wife and burst out laughing. You know that feeling when you're watching a train wreck in slow motion? That sick fascination where you can't look away even though you know it's going to be absolutely brutal? Well, that's exactly what I was experiencing as I sat in that stuffy Nashville courtroom, watching my soon-to-be ex-wife Sabrina dig her own grave with a shovel made of pure arrogance and designer heels. The place was packed tighter than a can of sardines on Black Friday. Reporters with their little notepads and hungry eyes filled the front rows like vultures circling roadkill. Random strangers who probably had nothing better to do on a Tuesday morning occupied the middle section, treating this whole mess like some kind of daytime soap opera. Hell, even a few colleagues from my firm had shown up, probably wondering how good old Danny Crawford had managed to land himself in this particular brand of legal hell. And there she was, my darling wife Sabrina Holt. Yeah, she kept her maiden name because God forbid she'd be associated with my boring last name, sitting at the plaintiff's table like she owned the damn place. Those pearls around her neck probably cost more than most people's monthly rent, and she wore them like a crown, tilting her chin up at that perfect angle that screamed, "I'm better than everyone in this room, and I know it." The whole scene felt surreal, like I was watching someone else's life implode on the evening news. But nope, this was all mine, folks. Welcome to the Daniel Crawford Show, where marriage meets greed and nobody wins except the lawyers. That's when it happened. The moment that'll be burned into my brain until the day I die. Sabrina leaned back in her chair, and I swear she practiced that move in the mirror, because everything about this woman was calculated down to the last eyelash, and let out this laugh. Not just any laugh, mind you. This was the kind of laugh that could curdle milk and make babies cry. It was loud enough to make the court reporter look up from her little machine, loud enough to echo off those fancy oak panels, and definitely loud enough for every single microphone in that room to pick up and broadcast to whatever news station was covering this circus. "I'm taking half your millions," she announced, her voice dripping with the kind of confidence that only comes from someone who's never been told no in their entire privileged life, including your grandmother's estate. The audacity, the sheer, unmitigated gall of this woman never ceased to amaze me. She said it like she was ordering coffee at Starbucks, casual as you please, like those millions were already sitting in her bank account earning interest. Like my grandmother Eleanor's entire life's work, everything she'd built from nothing, was just another line item on Sabrina's shopping list. The courtroom erupted faster than a shaken soda bottle. Gasps rippled through the crowd like a wave, followed by the frantic scratching of pens on paper as the reporters went into feeding frenzy mode. Whispers spread like wildfire, each person leaning over to their neighbor with that "did you hear that?" expression plastered across their faces. And Sabrina? Oh, she was eating it up. She turned in her chair and shot me this smirk that could have powered half of Tennessee. It was the same look she'd given me when she'd bought that ridiculously expensive car for appearances, or when she'd blown 40 grand on her brother's gym that lasted about as long as a snowball in hell. That look that said she'd already mentally spent every penny and was probably planning which country club to join next. My stomach felt like I'd swallowed a handful of razor blades, but I kept my poker face intact. Years of dealing with difficult clients and hostile negotiations had taught me the value of staying cool under pressure. Besides, I wasn't here to put on a show or get into a screaming match with my wife in front of half of Nashville. I was here to end this thing clean and walk away with my dignity and my bank account intact. Judge Margaret Kinsley sat up there behind her bench like the voice of reason in a world gone mad. Gray hair pulled back in a bun so tight it probably gave her headaches. Wire-rimmed glasses perched on her nose. The kind of woman who'd probably seen every trick in the book and wasn't impressed by any of them. She'd been presiding over divorce cases longer than I'd been married, and something about her calm demeanor told me she'd heard bigger sob stories and seen greedier gold diggers than the one currently holding court at the plaintiff's table. She adjusted those glasses and looked at me with the kind of expression that suggested she was already 3 steps ahead of everyone else in the room. "Mr. Crawford, do you have a response?" This was it. The moment I'd been waiting for, planning for, dreaming about during all those sleepless nights when I'd laid in bed listening to Sabrina plan my financial funeral on the phone with her attorney. I stood up slowly, savoring every second, and reached into my briefcase for the manila envelope that was about to change everything. "Yes, Your Honor," I said, my voice steady as a rock. I handed the envelope to the bailiff like I was passing along the morning newspaper. "I believe you'll find this document illuminating. Check again." The bailiff walked that envelope over to Judge Kinsley like he was carrying the crown jewels, and I watched every step. The anticipation in that room was thicker than molasses. You could have heard a pin drop if it wasn't for the sound of reporters holding their breath and Sabrina's fingernails tapping impatiently on the table. Judge Kinsley opened the envelope with all the ceremony of someone opening their electric bill, but the moment she flipped to the first page, everything changed. Her shoulders started shaking like she was trying not to sneeze, and then this little chuckle escaped her lips. Not a polite courtroom chuckle either. This was genuine, honest-to-God amusement. That chuckle grew into a laugh, and that laugh grew into something that had the gavel slipping in her hand. She was laughing so hard she had to take off her glasses and wipe her eyes. The whole courtroom was frozen, watching this dignified judge lose her composure over whatever was in that envelope. But here's the beautiful part. She wasn't laughing at me. Every eye in that room could see exactly who was on the receiving end of Judge Kinsley's amusement. Sabrina's face went from smug confidence to confused panic faster than you could say prenuptial agreement. And me? I just stood there, hands clasped behind my back, trying not to smile too wide as Justice finally decided to show up fashionably late to the party. You know how they say hindsight is 20/20? Well, let me tell you, looking back at how I met Sabrina is like watching a horror movie where you're screaming at the screen, "Don't go in the basement, you idiot." Except I was the idiot, and the basement was a 5'6" blonde with a smile that could sell ice to Eskimos and the moral compass of a Vegas slot machine. It was 5 years ago, back when I actually thought I had life figured out. Daniel Crawford, 40 years old at the time, owner and founder of Crawford Logistics, a supply chain consulting firm that I'd built from scratch after years of watching other companies hemorrhage money through sheer incompetence. You'd be amazed how many businesses think logistics is just moving stuff from point A to point B, without realizing that there's actual science behind making sure point A it doesn't end up costing you your firstborn child, and point B doesn't require selling a kidney to him. Why grandmother Eleanor had raised me after my parents decided to take their final road trip courtesy of a drunk driver when I was 12. Eleanor was old school tough, the kind of woman who could balance a checkbook, fix a leaky faucet, and guilt you into eating your vegetables all while wearing pearls and heels. She'd built herself a nice little real estate empire back when women in business were about as welcome as a skunk at a garden party. By the time I was an adult, she was sitting pretty on a portfolio that would make most financial advisors weep with joy. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Back then, I was just a workaholic bachelor who'd spent the better part of a decade building my business instead of building a social life. My idea of a wild Friday night was staying late at the office to crunch numbers and maybe ordering Chinese takeout if I was feeling particularly adventurous. Romance? What was that? I'd had a few relationships over the years, but they all seemed to fizzle out around the time women realized I was more passionate about supply chain optimization than I was about candlelit dinners and weekend getaways. Enter the Memphis Business Development Fundraiser, spring of 2019. One of those fancy charity things where successful people pay ridiculous amounts of money to eat mediocre chicken and pat themselves on the back for caring about the community. I normally avoided these events like the plague, but my accountant Victor Hale had been nagging me about networking and putting myself out there. Easy for him to say. Victor could charm the paint off a barn and probably had more phone numbers in his contact list than a telemarketing company. So there I was, nursing a whiskey that probably cost more per ounce than my first car, trying to look interested while some pharmaceutical executive droned on about quarterly projections. That's when I saw her across the room, and I swear it was like someone had cranked up the brightness on a TV screen. Sabrina Holt was wearing this red dress that should have been illegal in at least 12 states. Not because it was inappropriate. Hell no, this woman knew exactly how to walk the line between classy and devastating. She had this way of moving through the crowd like she owned the place, stopping to chat with people who all seemed to light up when she approached them. Her laugh carried across the room like music, and when she smiled, it was like watching the sun come out after a week of rain. I'm not proud of this, but I spent a good 20 minutes trying to work up the courage to talk to her. Me, a guy who'd negotiated million-dollar contracts without breaking a sweat, standing there like a teenage boy at his first school dance. Finally, she saved me from my own pathetic hesitation by walking right up to me. "You look like a man who's either really bored or really deep in thought," she said, extending a perfectly manicured hand. "I'm Sabrina. Daniel," I managed, hoping I didn't sound like I'd just swallowed my tongue. "And definitely more bored than deep." She laughed at that, not a polite chuckle, but a real laugh that made her eyes crinkle at the corners. "Well, we can't have that. What do you do when you're not standing around looking devastatingly serious at charity functions?" Devastatingly serious. Nobody had ever called me devastating anything before. I told her about Crawford Logistics, expecting her eyes to glaze over the way most people's did when I started talking about supply chain management. Instead, she leaned in closer, asking questions that actually made sense, nodding at all the right moments. "That's brilliant," she said after I'd explained how I'd helped a manufacturing company cut their shipping costs by 30%. "You're basically a business doctor, diagnosing problems and prescribing solutions." A business doctor. I'd never thought of it that way, but damn if it didn't sound good coming from her. For the first time in years, someone was looking at me like I was interesting instead of just successful. There's a difference, and brother, did I soak up that attention like a sponge in the desert that we talked for 2 hours. 2 hours flew by like 20 minutes while she asked about my work, my goals, my thoughts on everything from economic policy to the best barbecue in Tennessee. She was sharp as a tack, funny without being cruel, and she had this way of making me feel like the only person in the room even though we were surrounded by 300 other people. When the evening wound down, she handed me her business card, marketing manager at Pinnacle Consulting, and said, "I'd love to continue this conversation over dinner sometime. If you're interested." If I was interested. Lady, I was ready to propose marriage right there in the hotel lobby. My best friend Harold Briggs had been watching this whole interaction from across the room, and he cornered me the next day at our weekly golf game. Harold's one of those guys who can spot trouble from 3 states away, probably comes from being a criminal defense attorney for the past 20 years. "She's moving pretty fast, Danny," he said, lining up his putt with the kind of concentration most people reserve for defusing bombs. "You met her last night, and she's already talking about dinner? Just be careful, all right?" Walter Price, my grandmother's old friend and retired banker, echoed the same sentiment when I mentioned Sabrina at Sunday dinner. Walter had the kind of financial instincts that had kept him successful through 3 recessions and more market crashes than he cared to count. "Sounds lovely, Daniel," he said in that diplomatic way that really meant, "I think you're making a mistake, but I'm too polite to say so directly. Just remember, when something seems too good to be true," but I was already gone, folks. Hook, line, and sinker. After years of focusing on spreadsheets and profit margins, having someone like Sabrina pay attention to me felt like winning the lottery and finding a unicorn in the same day. My friends could worry all they wanted. I was 40 years old, successful, and finally ready to let someone into my carefully constructed life. Looking back now, I realize I should have listened to Harold and Walter. But you know what they say about love being blind? Well, in my case, it wasn't just blind. It was deaf, dumb, and apparently suffering from a serious head injury. If I thought meeting Sabrina was like getting hit by lightning, Dating her was like being strapped to a rocket ship with a broken throttle. This woman didn't just move fast, she operated at warp speed, and somehow she made it feel like the most natural thing in the world. Looking back, I should have realized that when someone's in that much of a hurry, it's usually because they've got somewhere specific they need to be, and that somewhere probably involves your bank account. Within 2 weeks of our first dinner date, which, by the way, was at this ridiculously expensive steakhouse where the wine cost more than most people's car payments, Sabrina had basically reorganized my entire social calendar. Suddenly, I was attending riverboat dinners on the Cumberland, charity galas where the champagne flowed like water, and weekend getaways to Charleston that involved more luxury hotels than I'd stayed in during my entire adult life. "You work too hard, Danny," she'd say, running her fingers through my hair while we sat on some five-star hotel balcony overlooking the harbor. "You've built this amazing business, but when do you actually get to enjoy the fruits of your labor?" And damn if that didn't make sense to a guy who'd spent the last 15 years eating takeout at his desk and considering a vacation anything longer than a 3-day weekend. Sabrina had this way of making me feel like I'd been living my life wrong, like I'd been so focused on building wealth that I'd forgotten how to spend it. She called me brilliant, said I had vision, told me I was the kind of man who deserved to live like a king. You know what's funny about flattery? When you've been starved of it for years, even the most obvious manipulation starts tasting like filet mignon. And Sabrina was a master chef when it came to serving up exactly what I wanted to hear. She claimed she loved my drive, said it reminded her of her own ambition. She'd pepper our conversations with little nuggets about her own business success, how she'd climbed the corporate ladder through sheer determination and strategic thinking. "We're both empire builders, Danny," she'd say, and the way she said, "we" made it sound like we were already a team, already partners in some grand adventure. What I didn't realize at the time was that Sabrina's idea of empire building involved using someone else's construction materials. The proposal came exactly 4 months after we met. Not my proposal, hers. We were sitting in this swanky restaurant in downtown Nashville, the kind of place where they give you 3 different forks and the waiter explains each course like he's delivering a TED Talk, when she reached across the table and grabbed my hand. "Danny," she said, her voice dropping to that husky tone that made my brain turn to mush. "I know this might sound crazy, but I think we should get married." I nearly choked on my wine. "Married? Sabrina, we've only been dating for months, 2 weeks, and 3 days, she interrupted with a smile that could have powered the entire restaurant. "But Danny, when you know, you know. And I know you're the man I want to spend my life with." She had this whole speech prepared about how life was short, how we weren't getting any younger, how sometimes the best business decisions were the ones you made quickly before someone else swooped in and stole the opportunity. She made marriage sound like a merger between 2 successful companies, and in my adult state, that actually seemed romantic. "Think about it," she said, leaning closer so I could smell her perfume, something French and expensive that probably cost more than most people's monthly grocery budget. "We're both successful, both driven, both ready for the next chapter. Why waste time with a long engagement when we could be building our future together right now?" Building our future together. There was that "we" again, and every time she said it, I felt like I was part of something bigger than just Daniel Crawford, supply chain consultant. I was going to be part of a power couple, the kind of people who had their pictures in the society pages and got invited to all the exclusive events. 3 weeks later, I found myself sitting across from my attorney, Clara Mindel, in her downtown office that smelled like leather furniture and old law books. Clara was the kind of lawyer who could negotiate a peace treaty between 2 countries at war and probably get both sides to thank her for the privilege. She'd handled my business contracts for years, and she had this no-nonsense way of cutting through bullshit that I usually appreciated. "You need a prenuptial agreement," she said, sliding a thick folder across her mahogany desk. "And before you start with the romantic objections, this isn't about trust. This is about protecting your family's legacy." Clara had done her homework, as usual. She knew about my grandmother's real estate portfolio, knew about the inheritance that would eventually come my way, knew exactly how much I was worth down to the last penny. She also knew that successful men in their 40s who suddenly got engaged to women they'd known for less than 6 months were exactly the kind of clients who ended up in her office 5 years later, crying into their coffee while their ex-wives drove away in their Mercedes. It's not about trust, Clara repeated when she saw my expression. It's about being smart. Your grandmother didn't build that portfolio, so some woman could walk away with half of it after a few years of marriage. When I brought up the prenup with Sabrina, I expected resistance. Maybe tears, maybe accusations, maybe one of those dramatic fights you see in movies where someone storms out and slams the door. Instead, she laughed it off like I'd just told her a mildly amusing joke. "Danny, sweetheart," she said, waving her hand like she was shooing away a fly. "I don't care about your money. I just want you." She signed that prenup without reading a single word. Didn't ask for her own attorney. Didn't request any modifications. Didn't even bother to flip through the pages. Just scribbled her signature on every line Clara had marked with those little yellow sticky tabs, chatting about wedding venues while she did it. "See," she said when she finished, sliding the papers back across Clara's desk with a smile that could have melted steel. "That wasn't so hard. Now, can we please focus on the important stuff, like whether we want the ceremony at the Hermitage Hotel or somewhere outdoors?" Clara was thorough. I'll give her credit for that. Every possible loophole was sealed tight, every contingency covered, especially when it came to inheritance. She'd built a legal fortress around my family's assets that could have withstood a nuclear attack, at the time. Sitting there watching Sabrina sign away any claim to my family's wealth, I felt guilty. Like I was being paranoid, like I was starting our marriage with suspicion instead of trust. Now, looking back, I thank Clara every single day for being smarter than I was. Because if there's one thing I learned about Sabrina Holt, it's that when she's in a hurry to get somewhere, you better check your pockets to make sure your wallet's still there. They say money changes people, but what they don't tell you is that sometimes it just reveals who they really were all along. When my grandmother Eleanor passed away 18 months into my marriage to Sabrina, it was like watching a magic trick in reverse. Instead of pulling a rabbit out of a hat, the magician disappeared and left behind something I didn't recognize. Eleanor Crawford was 91 when she went peacefully in her sleep on a Tuesday morning in October. The woman had been sharp as a tack right up until the end, still balancing her own checkbooks and giving unsolicited financial advice to anyone within earshot. She'd been battling a weak heart for months, but nobody expected her to just slip away like that. One day she was complaining about the rising cost of groceries, and the next day she was gone. The funeral was exactly what you'd expect for a woman who'd spent 7 decades building respect in this community. The First Presbyterian Church was packed tighter than a rush-hour subway car, filled with everyone from bank presidents to the guy who'd been cutting her grass for 20 years. Eleanor had that rare gift of treating everyone the same. Whether you had millions in the bank or were counting quarters for coffee money, Sabrina played the grieving granddaughter-in-law to perfection that day. Designer black dress, appropriate tears at all the right moments, gracious handshakes with every mourner who offered condolences. She even gave a little speech about how Eleanor had welcomed her into the family with open arms, which was laying it on pretty thick considering Eleanor had only met Sabrina 3 times before she died. But it was after the funeral, when we were sitting in the lawyer's office listening to the reading of the will, that I got my first real glimpse behind Sabrina's mask. Eleanor's attorney, Thomas Mitchell, a guy who'd been handling her affairs since the Carter administration, cleared his throat and began reading from the document in that formal, legal tone that makes everything sound like it's carved in stone. Most of it was standard stuff. Donations to her church, a scholarship fund for underprivileged kids, small gifts to longtime employees. Then came the big kahuna. To my beloved grandson, Daniel Crawford, I leave the remainder of my estate, including all real property, investment accounts, and personal effects, totaling approximately $3.1 million. I felt like I'd been hit by a freight train carrying bags of money. $3.1 million. I knew Eleanor was comfortable, but this was lottery winner territory. Decades of smart real estate investments, careful savings, and compound interest had turned my grandmother's modest beginnings into serious wealth. The ride home was quiet. Too quiet. Sabrina stared out the passenger window while I tried to process what had just happened. It wasn't just the money, though holy hell, that was a lot of money. It was the responsibility. Eleanor had trusted me with her life's work, and that felt heavier than any dollar amount. When we finally got home, and I told Sabrina the exact figure, watching her face was like watching a slot machine hit the jackpot. Her eyes lit up, Her mouth fell open just slightly, and I swear I could practically see the dollar signs reflecting in her pupils. 3.1 million, she repeated slowly, like she was tasting each word. Then, with a smile that could have powered half of Tennessee, she said it again. 3.1 million. Danny, we're rich. That we hit me like a slap across the face. Not, you inherited money, or your grandmother left you well provided for. No, it was, we're rich, like Eleanor's lifetime of work had suddenly become a joint bank account. But love makes you stupid, folks. Love makes you rationalize things that should send you running for the hills. So when that little voice in my head started whispering warnings, I told it to shut up and mind its own business. This was my wife, the woman I'd promised to share my life with. Of course, she was excited about our financial security. Of course, she was thinking in terms of we. That's what married couples do, right? Looking back, that was red flag number one, waving in the breeze like a surrender flag at a Civil War reenactment. But I was too busy being grateful that someone was sharing in my good fortune to notice the color. Within a month, Sabrina had quit her job at Pinnacle Consulting. Just walked in one Monday morning and handed in her resignation, effective immediately. I don't need to work anymore, she announced over dinner that night, twirling her wine glass like she was celebrating New Year's Eve. We've got enough money now that I can focus on more important things. What kind of more important things? I asked, though I was already getting a sinking feeling about where this conversation was headed. Well, we need to start living like people of means, she said, like this was the most obvious thing in the world. Image matters, Danny. Perception is reality in business, and if we want to be taken seriously in the right circles, we need to look the part. The right circles, as it turned out, cost money. Lots of money. First came the car. A brand new BMW X5 that cost more than most people's annual salary. It's for appearances, Sabrina explained when I saw the price tag. People judge you by what you drive, and that old Honda of yours is sending the wrong message. Then came the country club membership. MAID Country Club, the kind of place where the membership fee could feed a small family for a year, and the monthly dues were more than most people's mortgage payments. It's networking, Sabrina said. We need to be around other successful people. It's an investment in our future. Her brother's gym was next. Derek had always been a dreamer with more enthusiasm than business sense, and when he came to us with his vision for a high-end fitness center, Sabrina was all over it like white on rice. $40,000 later, Elite Fitness Solutions closed its doors after 8 months, taking our investment with it. Family is important, Sabrina said when I questioned the wisdom of throwing money at Derek's pipe dream. We have to support each other. Every time I raised concerns about our spending, Sabrina had an answer ready. Every purchase was an investment. Every expense was strategic. Every dollar was being spent to build our future together. She had this way of making me feel small for questioning her decisions, like I was being cheap instead of responsible. Relax, Danny, became her favorite phrase. We're building a future together. You can't take it with you, so we might as well enjoy it while we can. But together was starting to feel pretty one-sided. Our money seemed to flow in only one direction, and we was starting to sound a lot like me with better marketing. The inheritance that was supposed to secure our future was disappearing faster than ice cream at a church picnic, and my wife was treating it like monopoly money. But the scariest part? She was so damn good at justifying every penny that I was starting to wonder if maybe I was the problem. Maybe I was just being paranoid. Maybe this was what having money was supposed to feel like. Maybe together really did mean her spending and me worrying. Turns out, maybe I should have trusted my gut instead of my heart. You know that moment when you realize you've been living in a house of mirrors, and everything you thought was real turns out to be just reflections of lies. That's exactly what happened to me on a humid Saturday night in July at the MAID Country Club, when I discovered that my wife had been rewriting our entire history for her new circle of friends. I'd been running late that evening because of a last-minute crisis with one of my biggest clients, some supply chain nightmare involving a shipment of auto parts that had somehow ended up in the wrong hemisphere. By the time I made it to the club's monthly mixer, the party was in full swing. The usual crowd of Nashville's finest were scattered around the terrace, drinks in hand, probably discussing their stock portfolios and vacation homes with the kind of casual indifference that only comes with serious money. That I spotted Sabrina immediately. She was holding court near the fountain, surrounded by 3 other women who were hanging on her every word like she was dispensing life-changing wisdom. My wife had this gift for commanding attention. When Sabrina talked, people listened. I'd always admired that about her, the way she could walk into any room and become the center of gravity. I was about 50 feet away, weaving through clusters of conversation, when I caught fragments of what she was saying. At first, I thought I was mishearing things. Maybe the distance, maybe the ambient noise of the party, maybe just wishful thinking on my part. The portfolio has been in my family for generations, Sabrina was saying, her voice carrying that confident tone she used when she was really on a roll. My great-grandmother started buying real estate back in the 1950s, and we've just been building on that foundation ever since. I stopped walking. Actually stopped dead in my tracks like I'd hit an invisible wall. It's all about patience and long-term thinking, she continued, taking a sip of what looked like champagne that probably cost more per bottle than most people's monthly cable bill. You can't just jump into the market expecting immediate returns. Wealth building is generational work. One of the women, I recognized her as Patricia Caldwell, whose husband owned half the construction companies in Middle Tennessee, nodded approvingly. That's so smart, Sabrina. Too many people these days want instant gratification. Exactly, my wife replied, and I could hear the smile in her voice even from where I was standing. My family learned early that real estate is the foundation of any serious portfolio. We've got properties all over Nashville, some commercial, some residential. It's been our bread and butter for decades. Her family, her great-grandmother, her portfolio that I felt like someone had reached into my chest and squeezed my heart with a fist made of ice. Every single thing coming out of Sabrina's mouth was a lie wrapped in the truth of my grandmother Eleanor's life story. She'd taken my family's history, my inheritance, my grandmother's decades of sacrifice and smart investing, and she was presenting it like her own personal origin story. "And what about your husband's business?" asked another woman. Jennifer something, married to a cardiologist who drove a Ferrari and probably had more money than sense. Sabrina waved her hand dismissively, the gesture of someone brushing away a minor inconvenience. "Oh, Danny's got his little logistics company. It's fine, keeps him busy. But the real money comes from the family investments. I handle most of the financial planning these days." Her little logistics company. The business I'd built from nothing, worked 16-hour days to establish, sacrificed weekends and vacations and social life to create. That was just Danny's little company that kept me busy. Meanwhile, she was positioning herself as some kind of investment genius, a woman of inherited means who graciously allowed her husband to play businessman while she managed the real wealth. She'd erased me from my own success story and written herself into Eleanor's legacy like she'd been there from the beginning. I stood there for another 10 minutes, listening to my wife spin elaborate tales about family strategy sessions and generational wealth planning, and our philosophy of conservative growth. Every word was technically true, just applied to the wrong family tree. She was so smooth, so confident, so utterly convincing that if I hadn't known better, I might have believed her myself. The drive home was tenser than a high-stakes poker game. Sabrina chattered about the party, about the lovely conversations she'd had, about how well-connected our new social circle was becoming. I kept my mouth shut and my hands gripped on the steering wheel, trying to figure out how to address what I'd heard without sounding like a paranoid husband. It wasn't until we were in our bedroom, Sabrina sitting at her vanity, removing her jewelry with the practiced efficiency of someone who owned a lot of expensive accessories, that I finally worked up the courage to say something. "I heard an interesting conversation tonight," I said, trying to keep my voice casual while I loosened my tie. "Oh," she didn't look up from the mirror, just continued removing earrings that probably cost more than most people's cars. "About family real estate portfolios and generational wealth." That got her attention. She paused, one earring halfway to the jewelry box, and our eyes met in the mirror. For just a second, I saw something flicker across her face, surprise, maybe, or calculation. Then the smile was back, bright and innocent as a Sunday morning. "The ladies were asking about our investments," she said, turning on her little padded stool to face me directly. "I was just explaining our financial situation." "Our financial situation," I repeated. "The one where your great-grandmother bought real estate in the 1950s. The laugh she gave me could have frozen hell over. Not the musical laugh that had charmed me at that first charity function, but something cold and sharp as broken glass. "Danny, sweetie," she said, standing up and walking toward me with the kind of predatory grace you see in nature documentaries. "You should be grateful I make us look good. Without me, you'd still be that boring workaholic nobody notices at parties." The casual cruelty of it hit me like a physical blow. "Make us look good? Sabrina, you were taking credit for my grandmother's entire life's work. Your grandmother's dead," she said with a shrug that suggested we were discussing the weather. "What does it matter whose name I put on the story? The money's ours now anyway." Ours. There was that word again, but this time it felt different. This time it felt like theft with a wedding ring attached. "It matters because it's the truth," I said. "It matters because Eleanor spent 70 years building that portfolio, and you were talking about it like you inherited it from your own family." "Oh, please." She waved her hand again, that same dismissive gesture I'd seen her use at the party. "Those women don't care about the details. They care about the bottom line, and the bottom line is that we're wealthy. How we got there is just conversation filler." That's when I realized I was looking at a stranger. The woman I'd married, the woman I'd fallen in love with, the woman I'd trusted with my heart and my future. She was a character Sabrina had been playing. This person standing in front of me, casually rewriting history and dismissing my concerns like I was an annoying child. This was the real Sabrina Holt. And she was just getting started. You know that feeling when you find out Santa Claus isn't real? That moment when your entire worldview shifts and you realize you've been living in a fantasy? Well, discovering that your wife has been planning your financial execution while you were busy playing the loving husband is like that. Except Santa's been stealing from your wallet and sleeping in your bed for 2 years. The emails were what finally opened my eyes. Not that I was snooping. Well, okay, maybe I was a little bit, but can you blame me? After that charming conversation about how my grandmother's life story had magically become Sabrina's family heritage, I was starting to question everything about my marriage. Call it intuition, call it paranoia, call it whatever you want. But something was telling me to start paying closer attention to the woman I'd promised to love, honor, and apparently bankroll until death do us part. It was a Tuesday morning in September when I found them. Sabrina had left her laptop open on the kitchen counter while she went upstairs to get ready for another one of her ladies who lunch meetings that seemed to be her primary occupation these days. The screen was still logged into her email, and there it was, sitting right at the top of her inbox like a neon sign advertising betrayal. Crawford divorce strategy, timeline considerations. My coffee mug hit the counter so hard I'm surprised it didn't shatter. Divorce strategy? Timeline considerations? I clicked on that email faster than a kid diving for candy at a piñata party, and what I found made my blood run colder than a Nashville winter. The conversation was between Sabrina and her attorney, Martin Kepler, a guy I'd never heard of, which should have been my first clue that something was rotten in Denmark. The email thread went back months, all the way to March, just 5 months after Eleanor's death. While I'd been grieving my grandmother and trying to figure out how to honor her legacy, my loving wife had been plotting my financial destruction with the efficiency of a Fortune 500 company planning a hostile takeover. Martin read one of Sabrina's emails. "I need to understand the optimal timing for filing. Daniel's inheritance has been in separate accounts for 8 months now, but I want to make sure we maximize the claim. Can you walk me through the best-case scenario for asset division?" Kepler's response was even more chilling. "Sabrina, the key is documenting any commingling of inheritance funds with marital assets. If we can show that any of the inheritance money was used for joint expenses or investments, we can argue that he intended it to become marital property. I recommend waiting another few months to establish a pattern of shared financial decisions." A pattern of shared financial decisions. Like Sabrina's $40,000 investment in her brother's gym that I'd stupidly agreed to. Like the BMW that was technically titled in both our names. Like the country club membership that listed us as joint members that I kept reading, my horror growing with every exchange. These people had been dissecting my marriage like it was a business acquisition, looking for weaknesses, planning strategies, calculating profit margins. Sabrina wasn't just planning to leave me. She was planning to take me for everything I was worth. One email from Kepler particularly stood out. "Remember, Tennessee is an equitable distribution state, not community property. The judge has discretion in dividing assets based on various factors including length of marriage, contributions of each spouse, and economic circumstances. We need to build a case that shows your contributions to the marriage's financial success. My contributions. The woman who'd quit her job the second my grandmother died, who spent money like it was going out of style, who'd never earned a penny of the wealth she was now planning to claim. She was going to argue that she'd contributed to our financial success. The most recent email in the chain, dated just 3 days earlier, was the one that really made me want to put my fist through the wall. Martin, I think it's time. Daniel's getting suspicious about the spending, and I don't want to wait until he starts hiding assets. Let's move forward with filing next month. I want this done before the holidays. Before the holidays. How thoughtful. Nothing says Merry Christmas like serving your husband with divorce papers and trying to steal his dead grandmother's money that I printed every single email, my hands shaking with a combination of rage and disbelief. 2 years of marriage, and this was what it had come to. I wasn't a husband, I was a mark. I wasn't a partner, I was a target. Every kiss, every I love you, every intimate moment we'd shared had been part of an elaborate con game designed to separate me from my inheritance. The first call I made was to Clara Mendel. My attorney answered on the second ring, probably wondering why one of her most stable clients was calling at 8:30 in the morning sounding like he'd just witnessed a murder. Clara, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. I need to see you. Today. It's about Sabrina. There was a pause on the other end of the line, the kind of pause that told me Clara's lawyer instincts had just kicked in a high gear. What's happened, Daniel? I'll explain when I get there, but I need you to know that Sabrina's planning to file for divorce. She's been working with an attorney named Martin Kepler, and they've been strategizing for months about how to get their hands on Eleanor's inheritance. Another pause, longer this time. Then Clara's voice, sharp and focused. Don't say another word over the phone. Get to my office. Now. 45 minutes later, I was sitting across from Clara's mahogany desk, watching her read through the printed emails with the kind of intense concentration she usually reserved for Supreme Court briefs. Her poker face was legendary. I'd seen her negotiate million-dollar deals without so much as blinking. But even she couldn't hide the flash of anger that crossed her features as she read Sabrina's correspondence. Well, she said finally, setting the papers down and looking at me over her reading glasses. The good news is that your wife and her attorney are idiots. That wasn't exactly what I'd expected to hear. Idiots. Clara leaned back in her chair, a smile playing at the corners of her mouth. It wasn't a pleasant smile. It was the kind of smile a shark might give a wounded fish. Daniel, do you remember what we discussed when you were getting married? About protecting your inheritance. The prenuptial agreement. The prenuptial agreement, she confirmed. The ironclad, bulletproof, absolutely unbreakable prenuptial agreement that your wife signed without reading. The one that specifically states that any inheritance received during the marriage remains the separate property of the recipient spouse. I felt like someone had just turned the lights back on after I'd been stumbling around in the dark. You mean? I mean Sabrina can plan all the strategy sessions she wants with Martin Kepler. She can document every penny you've spent and every joint decision you've made. She can argue until she's blue in the face about her contributions to your marriage. None of it matters, because she signed away any claim to Eleanor's money the day she signed that prenup. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I could breathe again. So what do? Clara's smile got wider. We let her make her move, and then we show her exactly what happens when you bring a knife to a gunfight. The morning of the hearing felt like stepping into a gladiator arena, except instead of lions and tigers, I was facing divorce attorneys and a wife who'd spent the last 6 months sharpening her claws for this exact moment. October in Nashville can be unpredictable. Sometimes you get crisp fall weather that makes you want to take long walks and drink apple cider. Other times you get the kind of humid heat that makes you question why anyone ever thought building a city in the South was a good idea. This particular Tuesday decided to split the difference, giving us overcast skies and the kind of sticky air that makes your shirt cling to your back before you even make it to your car that I'd barely slept the night before, which wasn't exactly surprising considering I was about to watch my marriage officially implode in front of half of Nashville's legal community. Clara had warned me that divorce hearings, especially ones involving significant assets, tend to attract spectators like car crashes attract rubberneckers. People love watching other people's drama, she'd said with the kind of weary acceptance that comes from 30 years of practicing family law. Just remember, this is theater. Don't let them see you sweat. The Davidson County Courthouse looked like something out of a legal drama. All imposing columns and marble steps that were probably designed to make you feel small and intimidated before you even walked through the doors. The building hummed with that particular energy you get when you mix high stakes, high emotions, and lawyers who bill by the hour. I'd been here before for business-related matters, but never as the main attraction in what was shaping up to be the legal equivalent of a heavyweight boxing match. The courtroom itself was exactly what you'd expect from a place where people's lives get dissected and redistributed according to state law. Dark wood paneling that had probably witnessed more broken dreams than a Nashville honky-tonk, fluorescent lighting that made everyone look slightly corpse-like, and that musty smell that seems to be standard issue in government buildings everywhere. The kind of place where justice is supposedly served, though based on what I'd seen so far, the menu seemed pretty limited. And Lord Almighty, Clara hadn't been kidding about the spectators. The gallery was packed tighter than a Kenny Chesney concert. Reporters filled the front rows like vultures at a roadkill buffet, their little notebooks and digital recorders ready to catch every juicy detail. I recognized a few faces from the local news stations. Apparently, the story of a successful businessman's marriage imploding had enough entertainment value to warrant actual media coverage. Behind the press section sat what looked like half of Nashville's legal community. Lawyers love watching other lawyers work, especially when there's potential for spectacular failure or brilliant strategy. I spotted at least 3 attorneys I'd worked with over the years, all trying to look casual while obviously hanging on every word. But it was the random civilians that really got to me. People who had nothing better to do on a Tuesday morning than watch strangers air their dirty laundry in public. Retirees, probably, or folks between jobs who treated the courthouse like free entertainment. The kind of people who slowed down to gawk at highway accidents and consider Jerry Springer high-quality television. Even some colleagues from my own firm had shown up, which stung more than I'd expected. These were people I worked with every day, people who knew me as a competent businessman and decent guy, and now they were here to watch me get eviscerated by the woman I'd been foolish enough to marry. Nothing says water cooler conversation like your boss's messy divorce playing out in front of a live audience. And there, in the middle of it all, sat my soon-to-be ex-wife. Sabrina had dressed for the occasion like she was attending the Oscars rather than her own divorce hearing. Designer suit that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary, those damn pearls that had become her signature accessory, and makeup applied with the kind of precision usually reserved for television anchors. She looked like success, like sophistication, like the kind of woman who deserved to walk away with half of everything just because she'd had the good sense to marry well. Her attorney, Martin Kepler, sat beside her like a faithful attack dog waiting for the command to strike. I'd done some research on Kepler after discovering those emails, and what I'd found wasn't exactly comforting. The man specialized in high-asset divorces and had a reputation for being absolutely ruthless when it came to extracting maximum settlements for his clients. He was the kind of lawyer who could find loopholes in the 10 Commandments and probably charge by the hour for the privilege. The way Sabrina and Kepler sat there, heads bent together in whispered conversation, you'd think they were planning the invasion of Normandy instead of arguing over who gets to keep the good china. Every so often, Sabrina would glance over at me with this smug little smile that suggested she was already mentally spending the millions she thought she was about to win. Clara, by contrast, sat quietly at our table like a coiled spring. She'd worn her lucky suit, navy blue with just enough authority to remind everyone in the room that she didn't mess around when it came to protecting her clients. Her briefcase sat open beside her, organized with the kind of military precision that had made her one of the most feared family law attorneys in the state. Remember, she'd whispered to me as we took our seats, this is going to get ugly. Kepler's going to paint you as a manipulative husband who tricked his poor, innocent wife into signing away her rights. He's going to claim emotional manipulation, undue influence, maybe even fraud. Don't react. Don't give them anything they can use against you. Judge Margaret Kinsley entered the courtroom like a force of nature, her black robes flowing behind her as she took her place behind the bench. I'd heard good things about Judge Kinsley from other attorneys, fair but firm, with a low tolerance for theatrics and a keen eye for bullshit. She had the kind of presence that could quiet a room just by walking into it, and sure enough, the chatter died instantly as she settled into her chair. "Good morning," Judge Kinsley said, her voice carrying easily across the courtroom. "We're here today for the matter of Holt versus Crawford. Counselors, are you ready to proceed?" Kepler stood first, smoothing his tie like he was about to deliver the Gettysburg Address. "Yes, Your Honor." Martin Kepler representing the plaintiff, Mrs. Sabrina Holt. Clara rose with the fluid grace of someone who'd done this dance 1,000 times before. Clara Mindel representing the defendant, Mr. Daniel Crawford, Your Honor. "Very well," Judge Kinsley said, settling her reading glasses on her nose. "Mr. Kepler, you may begin." And with that, the show officially started. Time to find out whether justice was really blind or just really expensive. If confidence was a currency, Martin Kepler would have been richer than Bezos as he stood up to deliver his opening statement. The man practically strutted to the center of the courtroom like he was walking onto a stage at the Grand Ole Opry, ready to perform the greatest hits of divorce law for an audience that was eating up every dramatic pause and calculated gesture. "Your Honor," Kepler began, his voice carrying that practiced smoothness that comes from years of convincing judges to hand over other people's money. "This case represents a fundamental question about fairness, about trust, and about the sanctity of marriage as a true partnership." Oh, brother, here we go with the sanctity of marriage speech. This from a guy who probably had more divorces under his belt than a Vegas wedding chapel. I could practically feel Clara rolling her eyes beside me, though her poker face remained absolutely perfect. Mrs. Holt entered into her marriage with Mr. Crawford in good faith. Kepler continued, gesturing towards Sabrina like she was Exhibit A in a museum of wronged wives. She believed, as any reasonable person would, that they were building a life together, a future together. When Mr. Crawford inherited over $3 million from his grandmother's estate, Mrs. Holt naturally assumed that this windfall would benefit their marriage, their shared goals, their mutual prosperity. Mutual prosperity. That was rich, coming from a woman who'd treated my inheritance like her personal ATM from day one. But Kepler was just getting warmed up, and I had to admit, the man knew how to work a room. "Instead," he said, his voice taking on that wounded tone that suggested my very existence was a crime against humanity, "Mr. Crawford used a prenuptial agreement, a document my client signed in the trusting early days of their courtship, to effectively steal what should rightfully be considered marital property." The word steal hung in the air like smoke from a house fire. I felt my jaw clench involuntarily, and Clara's hand briefly touched my arm in warning. "Stay calm," her touch said. "Let him dig his own grave." Furthermore, Kepler continued, really hitting his stride now, "the evidence will show that Mr. Crawford commingled these inherited funds with marital assets, used them for joint expenses, and encouraged my client to make financial decisions based on the assumption that she would share in this wealth. In Tennessee, Your Honor, when separate property becomes so intertwined with marital property that it loses its separate character, it becomes subject to equitable distribution." I had to give him credit. The man had done his homework. If I'd actually commingled Eleanor's inheritance with our joint accounts, if I'd actually treated that money like it belonged to both of us, Kepler might have had a case. Too bad for him that Clara was smarter than both of us combined. "My client," Kepler said, building toward his grand finale, "is not asking for charity. She's not asking for sympathy. She's simply asking for what any spouse in a true partnership deserves, her fair share of the wealth that was accumulated during their marriage." Mrs. Holt contributed 2 years of her life, her emotional support, her companionship, and her partnership to this marriage. She deserves to be compensated accordingly. He paused for effect, scanning the courtroom like a politician working a crowd. The reporters were scribbling furiously, and I could see some of the spectators nodding along like they were watching a particularly compelling episode of their favorite legal drama. "Your Honor," Kepler concluded, "I ask that you look beyond the technicalities of a prenuptial agreement signed by a woman in love, and instead focus on the reality of what marriage means. Partnership, equality, shared prosperity. Mrs. Holt is entitled to half of all marital assets, including Mr. Crawford's inheritance, and I'm confident that justice will prevail today." The courtroom buzzed with murmurs as Kepler took his seat, looking pleased with himself like a cat who'd just caught the biggest mouse in Tennessee. Sabrina reached over and squeezed his arm, her smile bright enough to power the courthouse for a week. She actually looked confident, like she believed every word that had just come out of her attorney's mouth. That's when she made her fatal mistake. Sabrina leaned over and whispered something to Kepler, but her voice carried further than she probably intended. Maybe it was the acoustics of the courtroom, maybe it was her excitement, but half the gallery heard her say, "Don't look so smug, Danny. You're about to lose everything." The irony was so thick you could have cut it with a butter knife. Here was a woman who'd spent the last 2 years treating my inheritance like her personal trust fund, calling me smug. A woman who'd rewritten my family's history to impress her country club friends was lecturing me about attitude. A woman who'd been planning my financial destruction since 5 months after my grandmother died was warning me about losing everything. Judge Kinsley's gavel came down with the kind of authority that could restore order to a prison riot. "Mrs. Holt, please keep your comments to yourself. Mr. Crawford's attorney, you may respond." Clara stood with the fluid grace of someone who'd been waiting her entire career for this exact moment. She didn't strut like Kepler, didn't gesture dramatically, didn't try to work the crowd. She simply walked to the center of the courtroom carrying a manila envelope that looked about as threatening as a grocery list. "Your Honor," Clara said, her voice calm and measured. "Opposing counsel has presented an eloquent argument about fairness and partnership. Unfortunately for his client, eloquence doesn't override contract law." She paused, letting that sink in. I could see Kepler's confident expression starting to waver just slightly, like a man who'd just heard thunder and was beginning to wonder if he'd remembered to pack an umbrella. "Mrs. Holt signed a prenuptial agreement," Clara continued. "She signed it voluntarily, without coercion, after being advised to seek independent counsel. She chose not to seek that counsel. She initialed every page, signed every signature line, and had the document notarized in the presence of witnesses." Clara held up the envelope, and I swear the temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. "This prenuptial agreement is clear, unambiguous, and absolutely binding under Tennessee law. But perhaps Your Honor would like to review the specific language regarding inheritance." Judge Kinsley adjusted her glasses and looked at me with an expression that suggested she was already 3 steps ahead of everyone else in the room. "Mr. Crawford, do you have a response to the plaintiff's claims?" This was it. The moment I'd been waiting for, dreaming about, rehearsing in my head for weeks. I stood slowly, savoring every second, and reached into my briefcase for the manila envelope that was about to change everything. "Yes, Your Honor," I said, my voice steady as bedrock. I handed the envelope, usually reserved for defusing bombs, that I watched her face as she began to read, and it was like watching the sun come up in time-lapse photography. First there was professional interest, then growing awareness, then something that might have been amusement dancing around the corners of her eyes. She flipped through the pages methodically, and I could see the exact moment when the full implications of what she was reading hit her like a freight train loaded with legal precedent. Meanwhile, across the courtroom, Sabrina's confidence was starting to develop some serious cracks. The smug smile that had been her signature accessory all morning was wavering like a candle in a hurricane, and I could see her leaning over to whisper frantically to Kepler, who was trying to maintain his poker face while obviously wondering what the hell was in that envelope. Judge Kinsley cleared her throat, and the sound cut through the courtroom tension like a machete through Spanish moss. "Mr. Kepler," she said, her voice carrying that particular tone judges use when they're about to deliver news that's going to ruin someone's entire day. "I'm going to read from the prenuptial agreement that your client signed on March 15th, 2019. The date hit Sabrina like a slap across the face. I could see her doing the mental math, realizing that this wasn't some vague document from the distant past, but something she'd signed less than 2 months before our wedding. Something she'd signed when the ink was barely dry on her engagement ring. Section 4, paragraph B, Judge Kinsley continued, her voice carrying easily across the packed courtroom, states, and I quote, "Any inheritance, bequest, or gift received by either party during the marriage, whether from family members, friends, or any other source, shall remain the separate and sole property of the recipient spouse. Such property shall not be subject to division, distribution, or any claim by the non-recipient spouse in the event of divorce, separation, or dissolution of marriage. The words hung in the air like a death sentence for Sabrina's grand financial ambitions. I could actually see the color draining from her face, starting at her forehead and working its way down like someone had pulled a plug and all the confidence was leaking out of her pores. But Judge Kinsley wasn't finished. She flipped to another page, her reading glasses catching the courtroom lights as she found the next relevant passage. Paragraph C continues, she said, and this is particularly relevant. The parties acknowledge that this agreement specifically includes, but is not limited to, any inheritance from the Crawford family estate, including but not limited to properties, investments, cash assets, and personal effects belonging to Eleanor Crawford or any other members of the Crawford family lineage. Holy shit. Clara hadn't just built a legal fortress around my inheritance. She'd built a nuclear bunker with Eleanor's name specifically carved into the concrete. I'd forgotten about that particular clause, but apparently Clara had the memory of an elephant when it came to protecting her client's assets. The courtroom erupted in whispers and gasps that sounded like a tornado tearing through a library. Reporters were scribbling so fast their pens were probably smoking, and I could see some of the spectators actually leaning forward in their seats like they were watching the final minutes of a playoff game. Kepler looked like a man who'd just been told his lottery ticket was a fake. All that confidence, all that theatrical posturing, all those eloquent arguments about fairness and partnership, it had just been obliterated by a document his own client had signed without bothering to read. But the real show was just getting started, because that's when Judge Kinsley did something I'd never seen a judge do in my entire life. She started laughing. Not a polite chuckle or a restrained judicial smile, but a genuine, honest-to-God belly laugh that started somewhere around her toes and worked its way up until her whole body was shaking. She took off her glasses and wiped her eyes, still chuckling as she looked directly at Sabrina with the kind of expression you'd give a child who'd just asked if they could pay for a Ferrari with Monopoly money. Mrs. Holt, Judge Kinsley said, her voice still tinged with amusement, let me make sure I understand your position. You're asking this court to ignore a prenuptial agreement that you signed voluntarily that specifically mentions the Crawford family inheritance by name, and that you initialed on every single page, including the page that contains the exact clause you're now trying to circumvent? Sabrina's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. For the first time since I'd known her, the woman who always had an answer for everything was completely speechless. Furthermore, Judge Kinsley continued, clearly enjoying herself now, you signed this document after being explicitly advised to seek independent legal counsel, which you declined to do. Is that correct? Kepler tried to jump in with some kind of damage control, but Judge Kinsley held up her hand like a traffic cop stopping a runaway truck. I wasn't speaking to you, Mr. Kepler. Mrs. Holt, please answer the question. Sabrina finally found her voice, though it came out as more of a croak than the confident tone she'd been using all morning. Your Honor, I was in love. I trusted my husband. I didn't think. You didn't think, Judge Kinsley interrupted, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop another 10 degrees. Mrs. Holt, the law doesn't recognize romantic naivety as grounds for voiding a legally binding contract. You had the opportunity to have this document reviewed by independent counsel. You chose not to. You had the opportunity to negotiate different terms. You chose not to. You had the opportunity to refuse to sign. You chose not to. You chose not to hit Sabrina like a physical blow. I could see her shoulders sagging, her perfect posture crumbling along with her dreams of walking away with half my inheritance. The prenuptial agreement is clear, unambiguous, and absolutely binding under Tennessee law, Judge Kinsley continued. Mr. Crawford's inheritance from his grandmother's estate is his separate property and is not subject to equitable distribution in this divorce. The gavel came down with the sound of justice finally showing up to the party, about 2 years late, but better than never. Mrs. Holt, you are entitled to nothing from your husband's inheritance. Nothing from his business assets that predate the marriage. Nothing from any property or investments held in his name alone. But Judge Kinsley wasn't finished delivering the knockout punch. She rifled through some additional papers on her desk, her expression growing more severe. However, Mrs. Holt, there is the matter of the debts you accumulated during the marriage. the credit card debt totaling $47,000. The unpaid loan on the BMW you purchased, another $23,000. The failed investment in your brother's business, which I see was funded by a personal loan you co-signed for $25,000. The math was adding up to a total that was making Sabrina look like she might need a paper bag to breathe into. These debts, Mrs. Holt, were incurred in your name and remain your responsibility. Mr. Crawford is not liable for your personal financial decisions. $95,000. That's what Sabrina's dreams of easy money had cost her. 95 grand in the hole, and not a penny of my inheritance to show for it. The Queen of MAID Country Club was about to become the princess of bankruptcy court. 6 months later, I was sitting on Eleanor's old garden bench watching the fireflies rise from the grass like tiny green spirits, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I could actually breathe without feeling like someone was standing on my chest. The Nashville summer evening was perfect, that sweet spot between the blazing heat of the day and the sticky humidity that would roll in after midnight. When the air actually moves and you remember why people settled in Tennessee in the first place. The house felt different now. Not just because Sabrina was gone, though Lord knows that was a relief bigger than winning the lottery and finding out your ex-wife wasn't entitled to half the ticket, but because it felt like mine again. Our marriage had turned my sanctuary into a stage set for her ongoing performance as a woman of means, but now the authentic quiet had returned. No more discussions about image management or strategic social positioning. Just me, Eleanor's old furniture, and the kind of peace that money can't buy but the absence of a gold-digging spouse can definitely provide. The aftermath of the divorce had been more entertaining than a Tennessee Williams play, and significantly more satisfying. Sabrina's descent from country club queen to bankruptcy court regular had been swift, brutal, and absolutely inevitable. Turns out, when you build your entire lifestyle on someone else's money, and that someone else turns out to be protected by ironclad legal documents, gravity tends to reassert itself pretty quickly. The BMW was the first thing to go. I'd driven past the repo lot about a month after the hearing and seen it sitting there among the other dreams that had gotten too expensive to maintain. Something poetic about that. All that image management Sabrina had been so concerned about, reduced to inventory at Bob's previously owned luxury vehicles. MAID Country Club had revoked her membership faster than you could say insufficient funds. Apparently, clubs that cater to Nashville's elite don't appreciate members who can't cover their bar tabs, especially when those members had been bragging about family wealth that turned out to be entirely fictional. I heard through the grapevine that her final appearance at the club involved security escorting her out after she'd tried to argue that her membership fees should be waived because of temporary financial difficulties. The friends she'd cultivated so carefully during our marriage had evaporated like morning dew on hot asphalt. Funny how quickly your social circle shrinks when people realize you were lying about everything from your family background to your financial status. Patricia Caldwell and Jennifer Watts her name had apparently blocked Sabrina's number after she'd tried to borrow money, just until she got back on her feet. Derek's gym had closed permanently, taking Sabrina's $40,000 investment straight to the bottom of the business failure ocean. Last I heard, Derek was working at a regular fitness center in Memphis, probably wondering how his surefire business plan had managed to torch his sister's marriage and his own financial future in one spectacular blaze of incompetence. The bankruptcy filing had been the final nail in the coffin of Sabrina's delusions of grandeur. $95,000 in debt with no assets to speak of and no income beyond whatever part-time work she could find. Turns out the job market isn't particularly welcoming to women whose primary qualifications are looked good at charity functions and married well briefly. She'd moved back in with her sister in Memphis, which had to be a special kind of humiliation for someone who'd spent 2 years acting like she was Nashville royalty. From what I'd heard through the legal community gossip mill, she was working at some retail job and living in a spare bedroom decorated with her teenage niece's boy band posters. The pearls were long gone, probably sold to help cover the monthly minimums on those credit cards she'd maxed out buying the lifestyle she thought she deserved. But here's the thing that really got to me. I didn't feel vindicated or triumphant or any of the emotions I'd expected to feel when justice finally caught up with Sabrina Holt. Mostly, I just felt tired. Tired and relieved and grateful that Clara had been smart enough to build that legal fortress around Eleanor's legacy. Because that's what this had really been about, wasn't it? Not the money itself, but what the money represented. Eleanor had spent 70 years building something meaningful, something that could outlast her own life and provide security for the people she loved. She'd worked when women in business were treated like curiosities, invested when the real estate market was still an old boys' club, and saved every penny she could squeeze out of a world that didn't make it easy for people like her. That inheritance wasn't just $3.1 million. It was Eleanor's entire life story, written in property deeds and investment statements, and the kind of financial discipline that turns modest beginnings into generational wealth. Sabrina had seen it as nothing more than numbers in a bank account, something to be spent on cars and country club memberships and failed business ventures. She'd never understood that she wasn't just trying to steal money. She was trying to erase my grandmother's legacy. That's why I'd started the Eleanor Foundation. Using part of the inheritance to fund legal support for people trapped in financial manipulation felt like the perfect way to honor what Eleanor had built. We provided lawyers for men and women who couldn't afford to protect themselves from predatory spouses, funded financial literacy programs for people who'd never learned how to spot the warning signs, and offered support groups for survivors of economic abuse. Clara had joined the board of directors, bringing her expertise and her passion for protecting people who couldn't protect themselves. Sophie Tran, the forensic accountant who'd helped document my case, ran workshops on financial security and asset protection. We'd helped 17 people in our first 6 months, and every single case felt like a small victory against the Sabrina Holtz of the world. The foundation office was in a renovated Victorian house downtown, close enough to the courthouse that people could walk over after their legal appointments. We'd furnished it with comfortable chairs and good coffee and the kind of atmosphere that made people feel safe instead of judged. Eleanor would have loved it. Practical help delivered with dignity and respect. No questions asked about how people had ended up in their situations. Yes, I sat there in Eleanor's garden, watching those fireflies dance in the summer darkness. I thought about Sabrina's laugh that morning in court. How sure she'd been of her victory. How convinced that her charm and her attorney's eloquence would be enough to override a binding legal contract. How quickly that confidence had turned to panic when Judge Kinsley started reading from the prenuptial agreement. I'm taking half your millions, including your grandmother's estate. The memory still made me shake my head in amazement. The sheer audacity of thinking she could waltz into court and lay claim to Eleanor's life's work, just because she'd managed to fool me into marrying her. The arrogance of believing that love, or what she'd convinced me was love, gave her the right to rewrite contracts and ignore legal documents. But Judge Kinsley's words still rang in my ears, clear as church bells on a Sunday morning. This prenuptial agreement is binding. Mrs. Holt, you are entitled to nothing. And me? I was entitled to something Sabrina could never touch, never steal, never diminish with her lies and manipulation. Peace.